Chapter 13:13. Although Feng Ling was prepared, the obstruction this time still had a very bad impact on the Feng Corporation. In just 2 days, the Feng Corporation's stock had fallen several times. All the large orders and unemployed executives in New York and the executives who had come to Washington were at a loss. Even Qin Shuk did not smile for the past 2 days. Every day, she seriously sorted out the company's financial situation. Tieming had been openly poaching people in the past 2 days, trying to poach many talents from the Feng Corporation. Feng Ling listened to the assistant's report. The assistant nervously looked at Feng Ling's side profile as he reported. Right now, everyone in the company was talking about it. They even said that this might be Feng Mingyi's revenge. No matter what the reason was, there was only one result from this planned and forceful suppression. It was to force the Feng Corporation into a desperate situation and wait for someone to take over. Has anyone from the company's board of directors called? Feng Ling asked after a few seconds, as though she did not feel any nervousness about the situation outside. She knew very well what the outcome would be if this battle was not fought well. That Feng Mingyi had never been willing to let go of the Feng family's big fat piece of meat. No, but... The assistant raised her head to look at her. She seemed to have something to say but did not dare to say it. Speak. Feng Ling's voice was straightforward. She was not affected by these events. When I took the elevator upstairs with the documents, I heard 2 executives discussing. They said that the board of directors in New York might go to the Feng family to talk to the old master and old madam. Then they want to hold a board meeting to impeach them. The assistant looked at her worriedly. This is all from what I heard. Feng Ling's expression did not change. I understand. Thank you. Originally, she thought that after hearing this, Feng Ling would be angry or terrified. However, the assistant did not expect that. Feng Ling seemed to have expected it. Her expression did not change at all, and she could not get any information from her face. However, thinking about it, it made sense. No matter what, Feng Ling was a very calm person. She did not show her emotions. The news that the new leader of the Feng Corporation was a cold-faced beauty had long been spread in the circle. It was not strange. However, this time, the matter had become so serious. Was she confident that she could survive this crisis smoothly? After all, the Feng Corporation was holding Feng Ling's phone. If they couldn't survive this time, not only would Feng Ling lose face, the Feng family would also be unable to raise their heads. After all, this was the Feng family's last hope. The remaining 2 old ones were no longer worth mentioning. Many people in the American Chinese business circle were waiting to see the Feng family's ending. Especially since the one targeting the Feng Corporation was the Feng family's godson. Feng Ling came to Tieming and was prepared that Feng Mingyi would not see her. But surprisingly, he actually agreed. The elevator slowly rose. This was the first time Feng Ling had come to see this man called Feng Mingyi, the godson that her father had raised for many years. This person knew the Feng Corporation and the Feng family like the back of his hand. It could be said that he knew the Feng Corporation very well, so it was easy for him to win every battle. However, he didn't know much about this Feng Mingyi. Under the secretary's lead, Feng Ling walked into Feng Mingyi's office. Feng Mingyi was a man who was pleasing to the eye. Furthermore, he was the kind of man who would make any elder feel that he was obedient and filial. This was also one of the reasons why her father had made a mistake in judging him. The young man sat behind the desk. The temperature of the air conditioner here was too low, causing one's hair to stand on end. After the secretary left, she naturally closed the door. Feng Ling walked over and sat down in front of the desk. This was the first time they met, but it was as though there was no need to greet each other politely. Mr. Feng's methods are impressive. In just 2 or 3 days, you've blocked the path of my Feng Corporation. Feng Ling's cold voice sounded. She did not panic at all. Feng Mingyi looked at this rumored cold-faced beauty. His eyes reflected Feng Ling's calm but untainted face. It was no wonder that almost everyone who had seen her in person was shocked by her cold and beautiful aura. She was indeed a completely different type of temperament from ordinary women. Everyone's surname is Feng, so there's no need to address me as Mississippi, Feng Mingyi sneered. Speaking of which, my name was given to me by my father. Seeing that you're half a sister to me, I don't want to make things difficult for you. I also know that Tieming is a branch of the Feng Corporation, and I know what I want. If it weren't for your appearance, perhaps the Feng family would already be in my pocket. Why would an outsider learn this and that to compete with me for this half of the country? I'm afraid you can't afford the half of the country that Mr. Feng has taken a fancy to. Feng Ling smiled, but the coldness on her face contrasted sharply with the smile in her eyes. I want to remind you that Tieming is a branch of the Feng Corporation. The name of the legal person behind it shouldn't have been changed yet. If I want to take it back, do you believe that I can remove it from Tieming at any time? Hearing this, Feng Mingyi only smiled. I thought you came here today to beg for mercy. Beg for mercy? Did you do something so extraordinary that you need me to beg for mercy? Feng Ling's voice was not as soft as an ordinary girl's. In this seemingly calm but tense environment, it added a hint of coldness. I'm afraid the person who can make me, Feng Ling, beg for mercy hasn't been born yet. Mr. Feng, don't take your little tricks too seriously. Why, do you have other tricks? Or can the Feng Corporation, which has no backer for a long time, find some backer? As far as I know, CEO E, who has the highest financing channel and the highest amount of money at this financial conference, hasn't even come into contact with anyone yet. CEO E and I have been friends for many years. If I don't speak, do you think he will give me a single cent? Hearing Feng Mingyi's confident attitude, Feng Ling's cold eyes turned even colder. CEO E? Initially, she had received news that the person in charge of the highest financing channel was not this CEO E, but it was clear that because of Feng Mingyi's tricks, the person in charge had changed. Yes, I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Miss Feng. Feng Ming raised his brows and looked at her. Something happened to the previous person in charge recently and he fell. The person who came up was changed. He has interacted with the previous person, but CEO E has never interacted with him. Do you think you have any chance of winning? Chapter 13-14. What makes Miss Feng even more disappointed is that I, Feng Mingyi, have never been an unyielding person. All the assets and family business under my name should have been mine. Feng Mingyi spoke very straightforwardly and did not take Feng Ling seriously at all. He was too lazy to even lie. If you're just greedy for the position of CEO, I can allow you to continue sitting here, but other than that, don't even think about getting anything else. Otherwise, Feng Ling looked at him without any fear in her pure black eyes, as though she had seen through his thoughts. Seeing that she did not show any signs of softening her attitude, Feng Mingyi narrowed his eyes. He did not say anything, but he looked at her meaningfully. Mr. Feng, I'm afraid you've misunderstood my purpose today. Oh? Then why are you here today? Could it be that you're just here to see me, your godbrother? I just want to invite Mr. Feng to bet with me today. Feng Ling smiled. This was the perfect counterattack to Feng Mingyi's arrogant attitude. Bet? What are you betting with me? The chips in your hands don't seem to be stable, and I can easily snatch them away. Bet? Do you have the capital? Feng Mingyi leaned back against the leather chair. In short, I can't play any tricks. Are you afraid, Mr. Feng? Seeing her attitude, Feng Mingyi's challenge factor was aroused. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her with interest. In this business circle where everyone had ulterior motives, it was rare to see someone with such clean eyes, and she was a woman. Putting aside his past with the Feng family, just by looking at her, he really wanted to dirty the pure things in her eyes. How did such a person survive in the business world? Let's bet that I'll definitely survive this time. How about it? Feng Ling's voice was as cold as clear water. Although she did not miss any of Feng Mingyi's expressions, she did not have any extra reaction. Feng Mingyi looked at her, his eyes filled with emotions. In fact, he really wanted to gamble with her openly, but just as CEO Yi had said, he didn't know who was backing her up from the beginning. Now, he could only obtain a small chance of winning from CEO Yi. If he wanted to play another game, he could no longer stop himself. Besides, Boss Yi was still waiting for her to come personally. What if I win? Feng Ming asked. I don't like ifs. If I really win, I'll hand over the power of the Feng Corporation with both hands and never regret it. On the other hand, if I win, I'll return TMing to the Feng Corporation. The word Feng in my name will be completely removed. I'll never have anything to do with the Feng family again. Right now, Feng Ling was talking business, and she could also speak in the way of a businessman. Ha! Feng Mingyi sneered. As expected of someone who grew up in the military base. The way you speak is like this. You don't even leave any leeway for yourself. Then I'll wait to hand over the power of the Feng Corporation. Feng Ling smiled lightly. Really? Since both sides believe that they won't lose, then let's write a contract so that we won't regret it later. As she spoke, she stood up and placed a printed document in front of him. The contents of the bet were all on it. You've already planned this? Feng Mingyi looked at the words on it and then at the calm Feng Ling. For a moment, he suddenly wondered if he had miscalculated because she was really too calm and prepared. If possible, I hope to erase the surname Feng as soon as possible and get out of TMing. Feng Ling glanced at him coldly. After he signed, she picked up the bet and turned to leave. After returning to the branch office in Washington with Feng Mingyi's signature, Feng Ling entered the office and contacted several people in charge of Fifth Avenue. After finding out about CEO Yi, she learned that CEO Yi would hold a banquet with many partners here tomorrow. Tomorrow night, the venue would be a villa in the middle of a mountain in Washington. The Feng Corporation was also invited. Logically speaking, the Feng Corporation had never cooperated with this well-known financial company in Washington. This time, it was because the person in charge was an old acquaintance of her father that she managed to contact him. In the end, the other party had changed. She had never even heard of this CEO Yi, so there was no friendship between them. Looking at the invitation list, most of them were companies that were very prosperous in the American Chinese community. Although the Feng Corporation was not small, it seemed a little far-fetched to squeeze into this list. Besides, she had never seen this CEO Yi before. Why was she invited? Why did Feng Mingyi repeatedly mention that only this CEO Yi could help her? Was there any connection? Are you sure you want to attend this banquet tonight? Qin Shuk stared at the invitation for a long time. Am I the only one who thinks there's a trap? With that, she looked at the people around her. They were all Feng Ling's secretaries and assistants. Hearing her words, they said almost at the same time, it's not just one person. After speaking, they all turned to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling was signing a document. She held the pen quietly in her hand. After signing her name, she looked up at them. I know it's a trap. Then why are you still going? Feng Ling pushed the signed document forward and said lightly, I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. If anything happens, I won't be the one to suffer. Qin shook. But we're in the business world now. It's no longer the circle where we fight and kill each other. Those people rely on force. If someone takes a fancy to them and drugs them, what else can we do? Feng Ling raised her brows. That reminds me. So? Qin Shuk looked at her. You think it's possible? Yes. Feng Ling said lightly, I have to go even if I do. Qin Shuk could see that he had made up his mind. She gritted her teeth in anger. Are you crazy? You know that they have ill intentions towards you. If something really happens, you won't even have a chance of protecting yourself. It's too late to run to a deserted place like the mountain villa. Even the police can't catch up. After speaking, she saw that Feng Ling did not say much, nor did she explain anything. Qin Shuk picked up her phone and quietly flipped through the address book as she walked out. When she found the name, she walked to the door and was about to make a call. Shuk, who are you calling? Feng Ling's voice suddenly came from behind. I rushed to the hospital at 2 in the morning. Qing Qing's baby turned from a viral cold to influenza B. He had a high fever of 39.6 degrees and was in a terrible state. Chapter 13-15. Qin Shuk paused. Before the call went through, Feng Ling had already stood up and walked over. She lowered her head and saw Li Nanheng's name on her phone. Seeing that she had been caught, Qin Shuk could only mutter awkwardly, "The police can't rush over, but at least Li Nanheng can." Feng Ling pulled her phone out of the address book and threw it back into her pocket. "You're not allowed to call him. Why did you inform him about me? I'm doing this for your own good. I'm afraid something might happen. If there's really a problem, even I can't handle it myself. It'll be too late to call anyone." Feng Ling gently patted Qin Shuk's pocket and looked at her deeply for a while. Qin Shuk was speechless for a moment. She could only nod. "All right, I understand. I won't mess around. I trust you. I know that not many people can beat you, but you still have to be careful." Feng Ling responded and returned to her desk to work, as though there was no banquet to attend tonight. It was as though nothing had happened earlier. Before going to CEO Yi's villa, Feng Ling left a message for Qin Shuk. If she called her at 8 p.m. but couldn't get through, she could call the police. After that, she drove to the villa on the mountain. It couldn't be said to be deserted. At least, it was a very prosperous, wealthy area in Washington. Many rich people here were used to living on the mountain. They enjoyed a luxurious life while breathing clean air in a good environment. Mid-mountain villas were the norm for rich people. There were many villas of this type nearby, and the parking lot at the foot of the mountain was also luxurious and large. Looking at the cars that had just parked in, it could be seen that the people who were invited here today were either rich or noble, and not ordinary people. Feng Ling sat in the car for a while and sent her phone's GPS location to the company's computer. Today, she was not wearing the suit she usually wore in the company. Instead, she was wearing a white and blue shirt that was a combination of casual and sports style. It was very comfortable and she was wearing a pair of white flats. The biggest advantage of this dress was that she could hide things. For example, she could put some small and precise daggers or blades in her sleeves and pockets, and she could also hang some things around her waist. After preparing everything, Feng Ling got out of the car and walked up. At the same time, Los Angeles, the Li family. It was rare that the 4 elders of the Li family had been in good health recently. No one had to lie down and sit to recuperate. It had been more than a year since they had gathered to play mahjong together. Today, they finally got together, so the game was set up. The 3rd son of the Li family said as he touched the cards, "I heard that Nanheng has been frequently appearing in New York recently. These few days, he seems to have contacted Washington. Why? Is the Li Corporation going to expand there?" The 2nd son of the Li family smiled. "Expand my ass. What else can he do in New York? Aren't you going to chase after your wife?" Lao San raised his eyebrows. "Oh, I had a stroke a while ago and was hospitalized. I was muddle-headed for a few months and almost forgot that Nanheng hasn't gotten his wife yet." "Why? It's been so long, and there's still no news?" Then, 2nd brother, third brother, and fourth brother looked at Li Junyan. Li Junyan expressionlessly played a card. Let him chase after his own wife. Why should we old men worry about it? Lao Si said with a smile, I don't think we should ask him to change the target. He's been fighting with that Feng Ling for so many years, but there haven't been any sparks. Perhaps it's just fate. Li Junyan snorted. I want him to change his target, but does that brat look like he'll listen to me? That girl Feng Ling is good and a proper lady of the Feng family, but her temper is really like an iceberg. Even if she really marries into the Li family in the future, I don't know if she will have a good attitude to show her filial piety. Lao Si then clicked his tongue. Touch. Hey, don't snatch it. Mine, I'll touch it. That's not necessarily the case. It's not the first time I've seen that girl. Li Junyan touched the cards and said, she's a good child, but her childhood experiences have made her habitually wary of others. I've also asked a few members of 11 Base who often come into contact with her. In fact, she's a very careful and caring girl, but she's always a little introverted. Instead of letting a granddaughter-in-law who whispers sweet nothings to me all day long show up in front of me, and not letting this kind of child who will say what she has to say and stay by herself come over, I'll be able to live more peacefully in the future. It seems like you've already made up your mind about this granddaughter-in-law? Second elderly smiled and said, then it seems that Nanheng has to work harder. Otherwise, when will I be able to hold my great-grandson? I was wondering why Nanheng was suddenly so obedient and willing to return to the Li Corporation. It was all because he made a bet with me that if I couldn't hold a great-grandson within a year, he would obediently scram out of the base and go to the Li Corporation to manage the company for me. In the end, don't talk about a year, this brat hasn't let me hold a great-grandson for 2 years. Seriously, since he was young, he could do anything. Why did he fall for such a difficult wife? My hair is already white. How many years can I wait? I'm already half a foot in the ground. If he really insists on marrying that girl Feng Ling, why don't the few of us help him? Third elderly said with bright eyes. Fourth elderly sneered. Come on, it's not convenient for us to interfere in the matters of young people. It's normal for young people to quarrel. Besides, with Nanheng's temper, only Feng Ling can suppress him. It's rare to find someone who can control him. Let him suffer there. Nanheng has gone to Washington now? Yes, he went to Washington to chase after his wife again. Tisk tsk, I think Feng Ling is his fate. Ever since he was young, his temper has been accumulated. He's just waiting to be subdued by that girl in the future. Ha ha ha, I think Feng Ling is in America now. It's better than when she was in England. At least she can see him. My premonition has always been accurate. I think Feng Ling will hear good news soon. That's right. Where did you get the premonition from? TSK, a place like Washington is not suitable for talking about work. It's suitable for talking about love. I really hope that these two children will be less busy with work and focus on their relationship first. Don't be busy all day. When can they have a child like this? Sigh, I'll have to wait. No, I guess it will be soon. Chapter 13-16. Mid-Mountain Villa. The space here was very large, and it was indeed suitable for a gathering. Feng Ling had yet to recognize all the people here. After all, there were too many people and it was too big. She only went in to chat with a few familiar people for a while before she was squeezed to the side by all the celebrities in Washington's Vanity Fair. When she stood not far away and picked up a glass of wine, she turned back to see an unfamiliar man in his 40s approaching. Yes, Miss Feng. Feng Ling turned back to glance at the man. Before she could speak, the secretary who walked over with him introduced, "This is CEO E, the host of the banquet in the Mountain Villa." "So you're CEO E?" Feng Ling nodded at him calmly. All right, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, nice to meet you. CEO politely reached out his hand to Feng Ling. Feng Ling also reached out to shake his hand. Just as she was about to pull it back, she realized that the man had tightened his grip. This was not too obvious, but it was a very obvious hint between the two of them. A man was interested in a woman and wanted to continue communicating. How could Feng Ling, who had been in this circle for more than a year, not understand this hint? She only smiled politely at him and pulled her hand back without a trace. She then clinked glasses with him. The person in charge of your company was another person in charge. Today is the first time I've met CEO E. In the future, I'll have to rely on your care for business cooperation. Come, let me toast you. The cup was filled with red wine that only exceeded the bottom of the cup. Feng Ling's alcohol tolerance was not good, so she never drank much after entering this circle. She only drank as much as she could. Miss Feng, you're too polite. Our company and the Feng Corporation are partners who often work together in the American-Chinese business world. If there's anything you need, Miss Feng, you can speak to me at any time. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Feng Ling changed the topic. First, she thanked CEO E for his kind invitation. Then, she led the topic to the target of financing at the end of the month and the various directions their company wanted to talk about. She did not exchange too many pleasantries and unnecessary affection. Although she had just entered the business world, she was cautious and quiet. CEO E smiled at her from time to time. At this moment, someone else came over to greet him. He nodded apologetically at Feng Ling and turned to continue chatting with others. She then glanced at the red wine glass tower in front of her. After confirming that everyone had gotten the wine there and that there was no problem after drinking it, she picked up another glass and held it in her hand in case someone came over to give her a glass of wine. If someone came over to give her a glass of wine, she wouldn't even be able to refuse if they came over to give her a glass of wine. At this moment, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Feng Ling took it out and saw that it was from Qin Shuk. Is everything okay? It was 7:30 in the evening. There was still half an hour before 8 o'clock, but Qin Shuk was too worried to sit still. Feng Ling smiled and made a call. After reporting that she was safe, she said that everything would go according to plan. After all, tonight wouldn't be so simple. However, she didn't know much about these methods. She didn't know if she was overthinking or if something would really happen. In short, it was better to be careful. After hanging up the phone, she suddenly heard a commotion at the door. Feng Ling turned around and saw a man in his 60s walking in. Listening to the whispers of the people beside him, she realized that this was a famous big shot in the financial world of Fifth Avenue in Washington. He was the idol of many young entrepreneurs. Feng Ling wasn't familiar with him. In her eyes, her idol in the business world was her mentor, Mr. Zand. There were also two young and beautiful women beside the big boss. They seemed to be about the same age as his granddaughter. The key point was that the two women were holding his arms, one on each side. It was a scene of him hugging beauties in his arms. Feng Ling didn't plan to go over. She was about to look away when she suddenly saw a familiar tall and straight figure from the corner of her eye. Her heart skipped a beat. She focused her gaze and stood rooted to the spot as though she had been struck by lightning. The man was not as tall and handsome as he used to be when he wore the same black uniform as her. His suit was well ironed, and his figure was tall and straight. He was handsome and dignified, but there was a cold smile on his face that kept people at a distance. This kind of distant and cold attitude did not make him appear particularly arrogant. Instead, there was a kind of indifference and laziness that came after experiencing ostentatious and noisy life, making him look cold and indifferent, but especially charming. Thus, even though he deliberately chose to appear after the big shot of the financial world, he still attracted the attention of the entire audience. However, he clearly didn't like these gazes. His expression was very indifferent as he glanced around. Even when the male assistant beside him said something to him, he also turned a deaf ear. Yuzheng also could not understand. CEO Li had never accepted this type of dinner invitation. Why would he agree to CEO Yi's invitation at this villa in the middle of the mountain today? The moment Li Nanheng entered, Feng Ling looked away. It was Li Nanheng. Qin Shuk had been stopped by her once, so she definitely wouldn't rashly call him to inform him of this matter. In other words, Li Nanheng was one of the invited guests today. That's right. The Li Corporation's status in the Chinese world in the United States was almost on equal footing with Mr. Mo's Shine Group. In addition, with 11 base behind them, they were an existence that neither the underworld or the underworld dared to provoke. Although Li Nanheng had left the base, his reputation was still there. This time, the Li Corporation, which never participated in these small projects, had thrown out an olive branch. These people would definitely risk their lives to curry favor with him. Of course, he would not be left behind. But did he know that she was here before he came? He clearly knew what the bet she had made with him was, yet he still came here to snatch the investment from her. Did he really want to pocket the 1 billion yuan? However, at this moment, Feng Ling suddenly realized that she seemed to have made a stumbling block for herself. If that was the case, if Li Nanheng would personally appear to compete with her every time there was a competition, she would only have a 30% chance of getting the investment. After all, he should be the one the investors should curry favor with. As long as he nodded, who would dare to refuse? At that time, she had only thought about not letting the forces behind him finance him, but she had neglected the Li Corporation's status in the business world. Now, looking at Li Nanheng's appearance, she could tell that her chances of winning were very small. Chapter 13-17. By the side, there were 2 daughters brought by a CEO. They stood together and looked in the direction of the door and exclaimed, isn't that, the one from the Li Corporation?" The 2 young girls walked over there. Before Feng Ling had time to look back, she heard the 2 girls talking excitedly about the rumors about 11 base. Did all the girls like this kind of man? Li Nanheng is here too? It's really rare. The Li family rarely appears on such occasions, especially Li Nanheng. He has just taken over the Li Corporation and doesn't attend many events in person. It's really rare to see him here. Speaking of which, I've only seen CEO Li once. It was in Los Angeles last time. The Li family's strength and power can't be underestimated, especially Li Nanheng, who has always been mysterious. It seems that he has a lot of projects in his hands and has a close relationship with Shine Group. This kind of person can only be friends. Once we become enemies, we really can't take it. Then why did he suddenly come to such a small banquet? Feng Ling listened to the discussion by the side and turned to the other side expressionlessly. She went to the red wine glass tower and picked up a glass of wine. The wine in this glass was more than the wine on the long table by the side. The wine in this glass was almost half a glass. At this moment, she suddenly heard someone beside Li Nanheng say, "Mr. Li is really better than hearing about it. It's rare to see you in such a place. Nice to meet you." Someone else said, "I heard that Mr. Li rarely has women by his side. Could it be that he's really abstinent to a certain extent? He even brings a male assistant to a banquet. He doesn't even bring a female secretary by his side." Abstinence? Feng Ling expressionlessly raised her glass and drank the wine in one gulp. Fortunately, not long after, the topic about Li Nanheng's abstinence was politely ended by him with a few words. Li Nanheng whispered a few words to his assistant, Yuzheng, and turned to chat with the celebrities who came up to him. However, at this time, the socialites who had appeared out of nowhere were all standing there, smiling and listening to their conversation. It was as though they were very happy to stand there and play the role of a vase. Clearly, they seemed very happy to play the role of a vase for Li Nanheng. Sure enough, when she was in 11 base, she was in a different state after leaving the base and entering the business circle. At the very least, there were too many women in this circle. No matter if it was a successful woman, a rich lady, or a business partner, the last thing Lee Nanhung lacked was women. However, he only had a male assistant by his side, causing those vases who were attracted to him to be unsure if he was really not interested in women, or if there was something wrong with his sexual orientation. Therefore, they didn't dare to be too arrogant and could only watch from the side, silently observing and waiting for an opportunity to make a move. However, when she turned around, she could still hear a woman whispering, "I didn't expect Lee Nanhung to be so handsome. I thought that a man who has been in the military base for so many years would either be big and silly or the dark-skinned and average-looking. In short, I always thought that he would be the masculine type. I didn't expect him to be so good-looking. His handsomeness is beyond my imagination. This young master of the Lee clan rarely shows up before, so I've never seen him before. I didn't expect him to be so good-looking. I really want to chase after him. Look at how he brought a male assistant to a simple dinner party. It's obvious that he really doesn't keep women by his side. You want to chase after him? Can you catch up? I'm afraid even if you go, you'll hit a wall. That might not be the case. What if he just hasn't met anyone suitable?" Although Fong Ling was wary of CEO Yi's motives, at least she wasn't afraid of attending the dinner party. But now, she really regretted it. Perhaps she shouldn't have come. She decided that she had to keep a low profile today. She definitely couldn't let Lee Nanhung see her. Based on this man's arrogant behavior, if he saw her here, who knew what would happen? He didn't bring a woman with him because he only had one woman in his eyes for so many years. As the only woman in his eyes, Fong Ling didn't really want to have this title. She came here today to take the opportunity to talk about the financing. If Lee Nanhung was also here, not to mention that it was not good for her to speak now, even if she spoke, he could shut her up with one sentence. There was already a bet. If he went all out, she probably wouldn't be able to get a single cent of this financing. Then why was she still wasting her time here? She might as well go somewhere else to raise 1 billion yuan. Thinking of this, she put down the glass in her hand and turned to leave. In the end, she walked too fast and did not notice it. She bumped into CEO Yi, who had walked close to her at some point in time. The wine glass in CEO Yi's hand was knocked over by her and splashed onto his suit. His expression changed as he looked up at him. "Sorry." Fong Ling saw that the wine glass in CEO Yi's hand was originally very stable. He shouldn't have flipped it, but he had actually splashed it all over him. After a moment of hesitation, she corrected her expression and gave him an apologetic look. "I left in a hurry and didn't see clearly. I'm sorry." CEO Yi looked at her and smiled. It's fine, it's fine. How about this? I'll help you wipe it first." Fong Ling picked up a tissue from the table to help him wipe the wine stains on his shirt. "I'm really sorry, CEO Yi, it's okay." CEO Yi took the tissue from her hand and held her hand unintentionally. He then smiled at her. "My clothes are so dirty. Why don't you accompany me back to my room to change my shirt, Miss Fong?" Fong Ling abruptly retracted her hand and looked up at the light in CEO Yi's eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose, but CEO Yi should change his clothes himself." She paused for a moment and remembered that she was in the business circle, so she couldn't be too straightforward. She simply said, "The bathroom is next door. I'll accompany you in to clean it up." "How do we clean it?" CEO Yi lowered his head and shook the red wine stain on his shirt. "No matter how we clean it, this shirt is already ruined. We can't go in and wash it before wearing it, right? Why don't we go back to our room and change? My secretary isn't around. Miss Fong, come with me. Then, shall I call your secretary for you?" Fong Ling still had an apologetic expression, but she had already taken a step back to maintain a proper distance. Her eyes were cold and disgusted. "No need. Just accompany me," CEO said as he reached out to hold her hand. Babies, if you have monthly votes, vote. Chapter 13:18. Feng Ling looked at CEO's outstretched hand. At the same time, she saw the few people nearby who seemed to have noticed what was going on but did not even look in this direction. She finally knew his plan. The first step was to wait for the willing person to take the bait. If she was unwilling, who knew what would happen next? "Why, Miss Feng, you messed up my shirt like this. Are you afraid that I'll do something to you?" CEO saw that she had been politely avoiding him and his gaze turned cold. He sneered and said, "This banquet is still in progress. I'm the host of tonight's banquet. I don't think you want to see me appear so dirty, do you, Miss Feng?" "CEO, I can go back and compensate you with a shirt of the same style or better than this one. As for changing clothes, we're all adults, not children. We have to avoid arousing suspicion." Feng Ling said straightforwardly, "I hope CEO won't make things too difficult for me." "Miss Feng, you're here to talk about financing today, right?" At this moment, CEO's secretary happened to come over with some financing information. After seeing the situation here, he seemed to have listened for a while and then walked over with a smile. "CEO, this is a chance for you to talk to him privately. Other people might not have such treatment. Miss Feng, you don't have to be too careful. Our CEO is very upright. Of course we have to talk about financing." Feng Ling's smile did not reach her eyes. "I'll definitely compensate CEO's shirt. How about this? I'll send someone to buy one for you now." Seeing that she was still avoiding talking about going back to his room to change clothes, CEO's gaze turned even colder. "Who asked you to buy a shirt?" At this moment, CEO's secretary stood by the side and changed her expression. Her expression was full of disdain. Right now, the Chinese business circle in America is really uneven. Any ignorant person can come up to manage a company. This kind of person who dirties someone's clothes and is still so proud can be invited here. Our CEO is really too good-tempered. Otherwise, a company like the Phone Corporation wouldn't even have the chance to come to Washington this time. You really think too highly of yourself. I asked you to apologize and accompany him to change clothes, but you're afraid of this and that. What can a person like you do? Feng Ling endured it. However, although she knew that this was a trap, it still seemed like she was in the wrong. Her expression did not change, but her eyes were cold. Now, any Tom, Dick, or Harry can be a secretary. It was indeed my fault for bumping into CEO. At the same time, I've already made the compensation and apology. The most important thing now is that as a secretary, you should immediately send CEO back to change clothes. Don't you think this view is very strange? This time, Feng Ling deliberately raised her voice so that the people around her could hear the development of the situation. CEO saw her goal and narrowed his eyes. Miss Feng's temper is very stubborn. Are you sure you can survive in this circle with your personality? Whether I can survive or not depends on where I want to stand. Whether I can survive or not depends on where I want to stand. Although this billion yuan is in your hands, and I do need your company's financing, it doesn't mean that the Phone Corporation won't be able to survive without this financing. Right now, we're just giving each other a chance to cooperate. It's just a choice between getting the opportunity and losing the opportunity. Neither of them is a dead end, so why are you so decisive? Feng Ling said lightly, so, CEO, someone with broad horizons like you will block the path of a small company like the Phone Corporation just because of a piece of clothing? You. CEO did not speak, but the secretary did not expect her to retort. She even used such a method to hint at something. She immediately turned to look at CEOE. Our CEOE has broad horizons. He won't argue with a small character like you, but you're too insensible, the secretary said again and rolled her eyes at Feng Ling. All right, stop talking. CEOE ended the conversation in time, but his expression was not very good. Since Miss Feng doesn't like our financing, there's no need for us to communicate. I think Miss Feng has no intention of talking to us about this today. I can only wish Miss Feng good food and drink here. Does your company always cooperate with people by asking them to enter the room to change clothes? Feng Ling's tone turned cold. CEOE, I don't know if you set this rule or if it was set by your boss. So what if I said it? CEOE was obviously unhappy when he saw that she was deliberately raising her voice to let others hear their conversation. Previously, he had noticed that Feng Ling's personality was very quiet and cold. She didn't like to cause trouble, and whenever she encountered something, she would deal with it coldly. It was precisely because he had taken a fancy to this that he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. However, he didn't expect that she wasn't someone who could completely endure it. As CEOE spoke, he suddenly reached out to grab her wrist. I don't think you're in the mood to continue discussing cooperation with others here. Why don't you come with me to find a place to have a good, detailed, and fresh chat? He enunciated the last few words very slowly, and his voice was also very low. However, Feng Ling waved his hand away and turned to leave with a cold expression. However, at this moment, two security guards suddenly stood by the side and blocked her way. When she saw the two security guards, Feng Ling's expression did not change. She looked at them coldly until CEOE walked over and stood less than half a meter behind her. He said in a low voice, Miss Feng, you're a smart person. You should have guessed something before you came. Do you think the security facilities in my villa are poor? When you entered the door, the surveillance camera at the door detected that you were equipped with a dagger and several sharp blades. I know that you are different from ordinary girls, but do you think that you have the ability to hurt people now that you are standing here? You have to know that you're no longer the daughter of the Feng family. You have the entire Feng Corporation and the Feng family behind you. If you dare to kill anyone here, we can destroy your entire Feng family. Not far away, Li Nanheng was chatting with a few businessmen and celebrities. His attitude was aloof and noble, but not arrogant. Although his expression was cold, the celebrities did not feel like they were being slighted. Suddenly, the sound of a wine glass shattering entered his ears. Chapter 13:19. Do you think you're so capable? Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have some skills? It won't be so easy to get by here. Hearing this voice, Li Nanheng frowned slightly. He casually glanced at the crowd 20 meters away, only to see Feng Ling's figure. The man's pupils constricted slightly. When he saw that she was trapped by two security guards, his expression changed. Seeing this, a few businessmen and celebrities followed his gaze and looked over. Then, someone quickly went over to smooth things over and said, Boss E, what happened? Why did you start making things difficult for a woman? You're Miss Feng, right? Are you alright? The last sentence was said by the person who tried to smooth things over to Feng Ling. As he spoke, he glanced at Li Nanheng from the corner of his eyes. If he was not mistaken, CEO Li should know this person in charge of the Feng Corporation, and their relationship was not simple. Feng Ling did not answer. Feng Ling did not answer. She was just thinking about the door she had just passed. No wonder it looked like a door made of high-tech metal. It turned out that it had an automatic scanning function that could scan all the illegal and dangerous items on her body. No wonder CEOE did not use any other methods. He knew that she would not be easy to deal with, so he simply wanted to take the opportunity to see if he could take any measures that would make her give in. In the end, he failed. Miss Feng doesn't look too good. Should I ask someone to send you over to sit down and rest? The person who tried to smooth things over said and gave his assistant a look. Wait. Li Nanheng's voice was low. He turned and walked in that direction. At the same time, he said to the celebrities beside him, "Excuse me." Yu Zheng, who was following Li Nanheng, quickly stopped, smiling politely at the celebrities beside him. He turned to look at CEO Li and his eyes were filled with surprise. What was CEO Li doing? Yu Zheng followed closely behind. There were two sides in her heart. One side was reminding her that if she wanted to break out of the encirclement, not to mention these two security guards, even the dozen or so security guards present might not be her match. She could just fight her way out. However, the other side was telling her that she couldn't. She had the Feng family behind her, and even if she couldn't get the 1 billion yuan, it was still necessary for her to gain a foothold in Washington. She couldn't be impulsive or use force to solve it. Just when her hand, which had just dropped the wine glass, was tightly clenching into a fist in her sleeves, restraining herself all the time. A lazy and smiling voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "Boss E, how did my woman provoke you?" This voice, the familiar voice, caused Feng Ling's cold heart to skip a beat. It was as though someone had hit her with a stick. Really, whatever you were afraid of came true. She secretly restrained her emotions and turned to see Li Nanheng approaching. CEO Yi's expression stiffened when he heard Li Nanheng's sudden words. He turned to see who it was. After seeing that it was really Li Nanheng, he then looked at Feng Ling, whose expression had become much calmer. "Who is it? This Miss Feng? CEO Li's woman?" CEO Yi. Feng Ling did not look at Li Nanheng. She only said lightly, "I'm your guest, and Mr. Li is also your guest." "You must have heard wrongly." CEO Yi didn't understand. If he had heard wrongly, then the others couldn't have heard wrongly. However, it was clear that those who had heard this had heard Li Nanheng's words clearly. For a moment, he was unsure. He could only look at Feng Ling, who did not even like to wear a gown and rushed to the banquet in casual sportswear. Then he turned to look at Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng did not explain further. He moved his gaze away from Feng Ling's face and turned to look at the others. What happened? The secretary beside CEO Yi thought for a moment and quickly went forward to add oil to the fire. Feng Ling clearly did not do it on purpose, and the wine should not have been spilled on CEO Yi, but such a small matter had been exaggerated by the secretary. She said a lot about how cold and arrogant Feng Ling was. In short, all the fault was on her, and she described her attitude as very bad. After listening, Li Nanheng only glanced at Feng Ling indifferently. The latter did not even look at him, but her expression was cold and indifferent. If it weren't for the fact that they were in front of everyone in the business world and that Feng Ling was indeed responsible for the Feng family, she really wanted to throw this secretary over her shoulder. She didn't even sneer, but her expression was very cold, so cold that it was as if there was a certain distance between her and these people. Even if she was being framed and embellished, she just looked on coldly and didn't rush to explain. Seeing her attitude, the two security guards reached out unhappily and grabbed her wrist. "Let go." Li Nanheng stood in the crowd. His face was obviously cold and angry, and his eyes were clearly dark. At the same time, he looked at Feng Ling. "Speak." "I have nothing to say." Feng Ling was suddenly pointed out by the man and looked at him. "It's a small matter. There's no need for Mr. Li to worry. I can solve it myself." "You can solve it?" Li Nanheng's low voice carried a hint of coldness that others could not understand. Earlier, he had said that she was his woman, but now it seemed like the atmosphere between the two of them was very far apart. Feng Ling glanced at him again. She recalled that it was rare for Li Nanheng to see her in such a sorry state. She had clearly said that she wanted to bet with him, but now she was the one being bullied for the sake of this 1 billion yuan. On the contrary, he did not put in any effort at all. If she made such a bet with him, it would probably be equivalent to a moth flying into a flame. Her brain was flooded with water to bet on this. Thinking of this, her face turned even colder. She did not want to say anything else and only said coldly to CEOE, "I'm sorry." Then, she turned around and walked out without looking back. She did not intend to give anyone any face. Feng Ling did not have the capital to be so willful in the business circle, but with Li Nanheng standing here, she suddenly only wanted to be willful once. She did not want to face him in such an embarrassing situation. "Stop." The man's voice was clear and deep, but Feng Ling had already seen through his emotions. She knew that he was not angry but was just warning her not to leave willfully at this time. She originally wanted to leave, but when she thought of the Feng family and the towering tree of the Feng family, she immediately stopped in her tracks and felt a chill run down her back. Chapter 13:20. Feng Ling really wanted to scold herself for being disappointing. She usually thought that she was very powerful, but when she really fell into the mouth of this business circle, she found that she really might not be able to handle it. In the past 10 months, she had been fighting with the people in the company and had not reached out her hands to the outside world. Now that she had reached out, she realized how bad the people in this circle were. She was quiet for a moment and abruptly turned back. "I've just been taught a lesson by CEOE. Do you have anything else to say, CEO Li?" Just now, Li Nanheng had publicly said that she was his woman, but now Feng Ling had a vigilant expression on her face that said, "I'm not familiar with you." Her whole body was in a state of cold vigilance, as though she might walk out at any time without looking back. At a time like this, she could still be stubborn. Li Nanheng was so angry that he laughed. He slowly unbuttoned the exquisite buttons on his collar. His aura was different from before. He really had the aura of a superior in the business circle. His black eyes were cold as he stared at her, and his voice was low and indifferent. "Come here." Feng Ling's scalp went numb from his gaze. It was as though he was looking down at her when she was thrown onto the training ground at night to do devil training. She kept telling herself not to get involved with him on such an occasion. "Sorry, today's occasion is not suitable for a newcomer in the business circle like me. Everyone, eat and have fun." "I'd better, I told you to come over." Li Nanheng mercilessly interrupted her. The self-mocking words of a newcomer in the business circle made him frown and his gaze dark. Feng Ling clenched her hands in her sleeves. Although Yu Zheng was not particularly familiar with this Miss Feng, he could tell that CEO Li was on the verge of anger. It was clear that CEO Li wanted to help her, but why did this Miss Feng keep avoiding him? Everyone present could see that the two of them were advancing and retreating. They couldn't help but wonder what kind of relationship this Miss Feng had with Li Nanheng. Feng Ling glanced at him again and met Li Nanheng's gaze. She pondered for a moment and turned to walk back. "It's just a small matter. Mr. Li really doesn't need to interfere." She looked up at his eyes and said, "There's no need to make our relationship so ambiguous on this occasion. I don't want to do this." As soon as she finished speaking, Li Nanheng's black eyes narrowed coldly, and his pupils constricted. His tightly pursed thin lips curved into a mocking smile, but his expression was extremely cold. The celebrities beside the man couldn't help but shiver. The assistant, Yu Zheng, felt that this lady was courting death. Li Nanheng ignored the crowd behind him and walked to the front of the cover. Looking at her, he bent down slightly and whispered in her ear, "No matter how stubborn you are, it depends on the time. Are you sure you still want to confront me at this time?" When he spoke, there was a cold sneer in his voice. When he spat out each word, there seemed to be some ice shards in his voice. "Otherwise, do I have to admit that I'm related to you in front of so many people?" Feng Ling said and stepped back. "Think about it carefully. If this billion goes down the drain because of your temper, it won't be long before you have to prepare to marry me. I gave you face and gave you some leeway, but now you don't want to give yourself any leeway at all? The man's voice was still cold and indifferent, but there was a hint of mockery. Where did the courage you had to make the bet with me go? It's so easy to marry you. I'm afraid I'm not used to it. As she listened, her heart pounded wildly. The bet was all because she had enough confidence, but now, this confidence had almost been wiped away. After all, King appeared out of nowhere. She didn't speak. She just hated the unequal status between them. It was like this in the past, and it was like this now. But thinking about it carefully, every time in the past, he seemed to be the first to give in. Thinking of this, her eyes gradually melted a little, but there was still some stubbornness in her eyes. The biggest resentment in her heart was that she should have listened to Qin Shuk's suggestion and given up on the financing from CEOE and looked elsewhere. She shouldn't have taken this risk. In the end, she even embarrassed herself in front of Li Nanheng. Feng Ling didn't realize that the reason she was really depressed and angry was because she had made a fool of herself in front of Li Nanheng. Her heart was surging with displeasure. Seeing that she was still deliberately drawing a line between them, Li Nanheng's jaw tightened. The next second, he suddenly reached out and held her in his arms. Feeling his movements, Feng Ling retreated in shock, but was quickly pulled back by the man. The moment she fell into his arms, the man's voice was close to her ear. It was as though he was whispering, but it was as though everyone around could hear his voice. Why are you still throwing a tantrum with me at a time like this? I just made you angry last night. Is there a need to not give your fiancé face in front of so many people? Fiancé? Everyone was in an uproar. Feng Ling, she was about to push him away, but the man had already let go of her. At the same time, he lowered his eyes to look at her fiery gaze. There was a smile in his eyes, but that smile was clearly warning her not to speak nonsense. If he didn't let her speak, he could speak nonsense? Whose fiancé? She had only run into a wall with CEOE and had other countermeasures. It wasn't even a month yet. How could he be so shameless as to call himself her fiancé? Did she agree to it? However, in a sense, Feng Ling was also labeled as someone not to be trifled with. Li Nanheng's name was of utmost importance in the American-Chinese business world. Although he had just taken over the Li Corporation, he rarely attended these banquets. Other than the family leaders who often worked with the Li Corporation, most people had never interacted with this former young master of the Li family. However, the rumors were all about how unapproachable this man was, how abstinent he was, and how pure he was. Thus, the socialites who saw him today were all very interested in him. However, today, this man had personally broken the fantasies of those socialites. Was he already engaged? I've read a lot of comments saying that I don't understand Feng Ling's attitude recently. In fact, everyone has different feelings. Some people think that Li is wrong, while others think that Feng is going too far. In fact, as long as no one violates their principles, nothing is a big problem. It all depends on how I write it, There will be a big plot before the ending of Ling Li's side story. Currently, Ling Li's side story is almost 4/5 complete. After the ending, Qin Shi's side story will continue. As for every story and every character, regardless of whether they are good or bad, Qingqing wants to thank everyone for their company. Chapter 1321. Li Nanheng never brought a female companion to attend. It was rare for him to appear at such an event, but he actually pestered the second miss of the Feng family, who had a strange background. He even said that he was Miss Feng's fiancé. Most importantly, this second miss of the Feng family was avoiding Li Nanheng. Even though there were no major media outlets invited to this banquet, there were still some small media outlets mixed in. They had already set up their own small cameras. Especially when they saw that second Miss Feng seemed to be planning to slip away in front of Li Nanheng, the relationship between the two of them was even more curious. Logically speaking, the two of them shouldn't have any interaction, but why did it seem like they had known each other for a long time? And Li Nanheng's actions were completely unrelated to the description of him not being interested in women. Feng Ling didn't expect that Li Nanheng could use his identity as a fiancé to suppress her in public. She seemed to be frozen in place, and her expression was a little stiff. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She couldn't deny it loudly. Li Nanheng was helping her. It wouldn't be good for both of them if it hurt his face, but could she just admit it? Looking at the people surrounding the two of them, she pursed her lips and didn't speak. The man let go of her and pushed her away by an arm's length. However, his hand was still on her arm as he looked down at her. At some point, the cufflinks on the man's wrists had been undone, and his sleeves had been rolled up a little, revealing a muscular and good-looking wrist. Such an action of hugging and letting go dispelled the unapproachable and cold image of him in everyone's hearts. However, coupled with his ugly and somewhat cold expression, it still made the people around him fearful, and they didn't dare to say a word. Feng Ling looked at him, but her mind was blank. All of a sudden, CEO stood by her side and leaned closer to say, "Miss Feng is actually CEO Li's fiancée. This is really big news. I really didn't expect it." It was clear that CEO was trying his best to smooth things over. He didn't take the Feng Corporation seriously, but he didn't dare to disregard the Li family. If the two of them were together, there would be no place for financial companies in the Chinese business world in the United States. In CEO's eyes, Feng Ling's silence really matched what Li Nanheng had said earlier. She was so angry that she didn't want to pay attention to him, but she didn't want to hurt her fiancé's face in public. Thus, she was conflicted and sullen. She put on a cold face and didn't say anything. It was as if they were indeed very close to each other, but they were quarreling with each other in a cold war. Get lost. Li Nanheng's gaze swept across CEO's face like a sharp knife. GM Li. He was so arrogant that he didn't care about anyone's eyes or the occasion. Feng Ling clenched her fists and approached him with some difficulty. She said in a voice that only he could hear, "What's the matter? Can't we talk after we leave this place?" After a while, she heard the man's chuckle. "You want to avoid suspicion? Very good." He said these two words indifferently. His icy gaze finally moved away from her body. Feng Ling turned her gaze to his face. Although the man did not leave immediately, he had already turned to walk toward the crowd. "Mr. Li, nice to meet you." The big shot of the financial world stepped forward and shook Li Nanheng's hand warmly. He was clearly very old, but because of his good maintenance, he still looked bright and energetic. His eyes were filled with admiration and enthusiasm for Li Nanheng. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Mike." Li Nanheng curled his lips slightly. Although the coldness in his eyes had been retracted, there was still some hostility left. This hostility made his gaze sweep over the people around him, and there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. W. 4M. Chapter 1322. Li Nanheng and Mr. Mike went to the front to discuss matters. Feng Ling remained standing in place. When she turned back, she happened to meet Li Nanheng's gaze. Before he left, he glanced at her again, and his dark and cold eyes swept past her body. Feng Ling felt that tonight's matter was a big mistake. Firstly, she didn't expect CEO to use such an unsightly method to test if she had any intentions of making a deal. Secondly, CEO didn't expect Li Nanheng to care about these things, and there was such an unclear relationship between her and Li Nanheng. In fact, even she didn't expect things to develop like this. She listened to the man's footsteps as he left, turned back to pick up a glass of wine and took a sip. With the help of the slightly cold red wine, she forcefully suppressed the burning sensation in her throat that was about to emit smoke. "Miss Feng, are you okay?" Because they knew that Feng Ling and Li Nanheng's relationship was not ordinary, the people nearby noticed her. Even if they weren't familiar with her, they still quickly asked with concern. Feng Ling held the wine glass in her hand and turned back to smile lightly. "I'm fine. You and CEO Li?" The man was curious and hesitant, wanting to ask something. "Mr. Li is joking." Feng Ling didn't want to explain further. She smiled apologetically at the man and turned to leave with the wine glass. Li Nanheng was actually very calm and rational in many things, but once she was violated or treated too rudely, whether it was in the base or here, all his calmness and rationality would disappear, and even the word magnanimous would no longer exist. He might really be able to vent his anger on all the business people present tonight. In fact, Feng Ling didn't know that she would meet him here tonight. In that situation, she didn't cooperate with him again and again. What would happen to her? Although Mr. Mike was old, he was a rather important person at tonight's banquet. What they needed to talk about were the profit-making relationships between the various companies and various general situations. The conversation lasted for about half an hour. Half an hour later, Li Nanheng scanned the audience but didn't find Feng Ling. He frowned slightly. "Excuse me." The man left these words and turned to leave in large strides. Feng Ling couldn't leave just like that. After all, what happened just now wasn't over. If she left without saying a word, the greatest impact would be on the Feng Corporation's reputation in the industry. She took advantage of the fact that she didn't have anything to do and didn't need to face too many interpersonal disputes. She went to the backyard of the villa and found that there was a huge pool behind it. The pool was surrounded by a unique European-style garden. When she walked out, the waiter in the banquet hall thoughtfully handed her a coat and said that it was dark and windy outside. If she wanted to go out for some air, she should wear more clothes. After thanking him, Feng Ling put on her coat and stood by the pool, looking at the huge blue pool in front of her. The guests were still chatting and laughing in the banquet hall at the back. The back was empty. Occasionally, one or two people would pass by, but they were only the gardeners or servants of the villa. On this mountain villa, there was only such a beautiful garden installed with many lights. The night view and lighting in the garden were also perfectly designed. It would not make people feel uncomfortable because they were on the mountain. Instead, the environment was good, the air was good, and all aspects were very pleasant. The premise was that CEO E didn't have those messy hobbies of seducing all kinds of women. He was really a person with good taste. Feng Ling stood silently by the pool. The wind blew past, causing a shallow layer of ripples on the pool. She stared at the shallow ripples on the waves and remembered the warning in Li Nanheng's eyes just now because she didn't cooperate. Since she had already entered the business world, she had to learn to be independent. In the past, she didn't like to rely on others for anything. Did she have to rely on Li Nanheng now? As long as he was here, many of the thorny problems she needed to face would no longer become thorny. In fact, many of the things she wanted to obtain could be obtained with a casual word from him. Such a gap was more because she was unwilling. She didn't want to, and she was unwilling to accept it. At the very least, she couldn't defeat him when they sparred in the base. Now, she still couldn't defeat him. Sometimes, Feng Ling really wondered if Li Nanheng had added infinite light and color to her life, or if he had added layers of heavy shadows. If she really couldn't get this 1 billion yuan, even if she was unwilling, she would probably be eaten by Li Nanheng in the future. Feng Ling stood for a while and prepared to return to the banquet hall. However, as soon as she turned around, a tall and slender figure suddenly bumped into her eyes. The man was leaning against the grape trellis in the garden between the villa and the pool. She didn't know how long he had been standing there. The beautiful lights in the garden behind the villa fell on his face, but his face was shrouded in the shadow under the grape trellis. She couldn't see his expression clearly. Only the flickering spark of the cigarette butt between his fingers flickered. If it was the Feng Ling who was still in 11 base in the past, as long as she didn't like him, she would really turn around and leave. She didn't even want to talk to him or say a word. But that time, Li Nanheng said that he loved her for 10 years. From the time she was almost stripped naked by him in the sauna room in the orphanage, to the time she used small stones to provoke him in the jungle outside the orphanage, to the time she entered the base, to the time she was 13 years old, and to the years that followed, his shadow had always occupied a place in her life. Even she didn't expect that she would be entangled with this man for so long. 10 years. Life was impermanent. How many 10 years could one have in one's life? She knew her temper too well. She was stubborn, careful, couldn't tolerate sand in her eyes, didn't like to turn back, and was often stubborn and cold. However, Li Nanheng insisted on loving her for so many years. There had never been a messy woman by his side. Even if there was, he never gave her a chance. He didn't even give her a chance to be jealous. Although she was angry, she didn't want to force the road between the two of them to be too difficult, so she made such a bet. Either marry him and be entangled with him for the rest of her life, or they would separate and never see each other again. Perhaps it was because they had been entangled with each other for too long that she did not have the patience and energy to cultivate her relationship with another person. Even if she really had the patience to cultivate it, who would be able to enter her eyes? Xiao Ba said that she and Jin Wan were the same. They learned to love for the first time and met the best person. W. 4M. Do you think this is a place where you can kill people? Do you want the Feng Corporation's reputation? Whether or not I can support the Feng Corporation depends on my own strength. With this luck, I can hold on. Without that luck, I can't do anything. Feng Ling lowered her head. However, just as he finished speaking, he felt a sharp pain in his chin. She couldn't help but frown. Li Nanheng coldly pursed his lips. Looking at her expression of enduring humiliation, the anger in his heart rose even more. He reached out and pulled the woman who could make him angry into his arms. He raised her face and kissed her heavily. Feng Ling's brows twitched from his sudden kiss and the temperature on his lips. She shivered and wanted to retreat, but the man took the opportunity to drive in and steal her breath. After kissing her fiercely for a while, he picked her up and pressed her against the wall. His hot chest imprisoned her, and the hot kiss blocked her again. Feng Ling almost lost her ability to think from his kiss. She had drunk some wine in the room. Although it was not much, she was blown by the wind for a while. The good red wine still had some alcohol in it. Her body, which was slightly cold from the wind, gradually warmed up. The heat rushed directly to her brain and then to her eyes. After a long while, Li Nanheng finally let go of her, but he was still not satisfied. He lowered his head and kissed her red and swollen lips heavily. As if it was not enough, he kissed her a second time and a third time. Feng Ling's every breath was blocked by him, making her almost unable to stand steadily. The drunkenness in her mind seemed to have become stronger. Her head was so dizzy that she knew she should push him away, but because she heard someone approaching, she did not dare to move too much, lest she attracted the attention of others. She raised her hand and tugged hard at the man's belt, trying to strangle him and remind him to let go. However, when her hand moved around his belt, her fingers rubbed against his waist. The man took a heavy breath and pressed against her forehead. His fingertips scraped the corner of her eyes, and his hoarse voice was filled with dissatisfaction. "With me here, what luck do you need? You've been isolated in the Feng family, and you've gone to England to study. You've tortured me for 2 years. It's enough." Feng Ling glared at the man in front of her who wanted to get back together with her and was so angry that she was almost speechless. She wanted to say that she didn't want to torture him. She didn't have so much time to be delicate. Life had shown her the way, and she was just following that direction. He was clearly the one who was domineering and shameless. However, Li Nanheng had clearly accepted her reason for, clearly feeling wronged because she left the base, but she insisted that she didn't want to give up halfway. He pressed his fingertips against her slightly red and swollen lips and explained in a low and hoarse voice, "First of all, I didn't come here today to compete with you for the 1 billion yuan, but even if I didn't compete with you and helped you pave the way, you would still lose to me in the end. I just didn't want you to lose too badly and help you on every occasion, but you didn't accept it and insisted on being stubborn with me. Secondly, you were destined to marry me anyway. Back then, your cenotaph was already my wife in name. The word fiancé doesn't seem strange to me at all. You have to get used to it and accept it as soon as possible." Feng Ling looked at him in disbelief. He shamelessly used the word fiancé to seal his own coffin. "Li Nanheng, you really don't have any shame at all. It's enough as long as I want you. Why do I need shame?" The man sneered and pinched her face with his fingers. His fingertips wrapped around her soft long hair. W.4M. Chapter 13:24. Feng Ling saw that someone was approaching and quickly signaled for him to let go of her with her eyes. However, Li Nanheng refused to let go of her. CEOE gave his company's big leader something behind his back. Although he has the right to talk about financing this time, he doesn't have enough power. If you want to please him, why don't you please me? After all, their company's big leader grew up with me. Doesn't that mean I have no chance of winning here? Feng Ling muttered to herself. Li Nanheng raised his brows slightly and smiled meaningfully. "Do you think I'll snatch it from you?" "No," Feng Ling subconsciously retorted. Feng Ling subconsciously retorted, "Even if you don't snatch it, someone else will. In this situation, my chances of winning are not high." Whether your chances of winning are high or not depends on whether you understand or not. Li Nanheng's scorching palm pressed against her waist. His eyes were deeper than the night behind her. "Instead of being obedient to someone like CEOE, why don't you treat your old acquaintance better? Perhaps I can help you." Feng Ling's brows twitched. "Li Nanheng, have you forgotten our agreement? Help me? Instead of making you panic after I win, why don't I let you win a small round first? At least your heart is still mine." Li Nanheng raised his brows and chuckled. "You stood by the pool for a long time. Were you thinking about how to win in front of me? Actually, there's really no need to go through too much trouble. As long as you smile at me and kiss me, not to mention 1 billion, even 2 billion or 3 billion yuan will be transferred to your phone corporation's funding channel in minutes," the man said as he played with her long hair. "And what I want is just you." Feng Ling turned her face away. The man raised his hand and turned her face around. "Don't turn your head. I'm serious." Could it be that he also knew that he wasn't being serious just now? "What? What do you plan to do about TMing? That's a branch of the phone corporation. Do you want to take it back?" "Yes. CEOE and Feng Mingyi have worked together for many years. The two of them must have known about this matter." "I guessed so. How do you want to TMing back?" "The legal person behind TMing is still on the phone corporation side. If I want to take him in, he won't be able to stand. Let's see if I want to target him now." Feng Ling glanced at the people passing by. Li Nanheng pinched her face and said in a low voice as he released her, "You don't like to be intimate with me in front of outsiders? I'll give you some face and go in first. It's very windy outside." In the banquet hall, Mr. Mike had just dealt with a wave of business friends who had come up to greet him. He then politely chatted with CEOE for a while and had already gone to the special VIP lounge to rest. CEOE still stayed behind to continue entertaining the guests. Without Mr. Mike around, the atmosphere in the banquet hall became much livelier. After all, when Senior Jia was around, Mr. Mike was the former mentor of many business celebrities. Earlier, everyone had been a little restrained, but now, they were more open. They danced, drank, and talked about things. The socialites who had taken the opportunity to surround Lee Nanheng stood by the side and whispered to each other from time to time. They found it unbelievable that Lee Nanheng was actually engaged. However, thinking about it, there was nothing wrong with it. The Lee family had always been cautious and never revealed their family affairs to the public. Lee Nanheng had just taken over the family business. With his current age, it wasn't strange for him to be engaged. Perhaps he had been engaged before he took over the Lee Corporation. But why did they vaguely remember that a few years ago, they seemed to have heard about the marriage between the Lee Corporation and the Phone Corporation? At that time, the media seemed to have spread it for a few days, but then the news disappeared into thin air. Back then, the second miss of the Phone family was still missing, right? She didn't return to the Phone family, did she? Could it be that there was something wrong with the news back then? Or was there some inside story between the two families? Lee Nanheng was intercepted halfway to discuss something, and Fong Ling did not follow him. Although Lee Nanheng gave her a look to ask her to follow, she chose to pick up a glass of red wine and raise it to him from afar. She had no intention of being tied to him. Lee Nanheng's face darkened and he was about to come over, but at this moment, Fong Ling felt a small figure flash past her legs. From the corner of her eyes, she suddenly saw a very small boy crawling out from under the table by the side. He then struggled to get up from the ground and walked unsteadily to the table, reaching out to grab the cake on it. However, there were still many wine glasses and red wine on the table. The child reached out to grab the tablecloth. If he continued to grab it, the tablecloth would be pulled down, and the cake and wine glasses on it would fall all over the child. Fong Ling quickly put down the wine glass, stepped forward, and picked up the little boy. Lee Nanheng's footsteps paused when he saw a child suddenly appear in her arms. For some reason, the scene of Fong Ling holding the child in front of him did not feel strange at all. The woman who had always been as cold to him as possible was holding the child with a very gentle gaze. "What do you want to eat? Auntie will help you get it. Don't take it yourself. It's easy to hurt yourself." As Fong Ling spoke, she tapped the tip of the beautiful little boy's nose. At the same time, she looked around. She didn't know who brought this child here. Why didn't she see his parents? Just as she turned around, she suddenly saw a familiar figure flash past, but the figure left in a hurry. Fong Ling's expression faltered. Wen Liqing? She suddenly looked at the child in her arms with his round eyes. This child looked to be a little more than 2 years old. His neatly trimmed and cute mushroom hair was pressed softly against his forehead. At the same time, he was trying his best to stretch his neck in the direction of the cakes on the table beside him, mumbling, "Cakes. Don't want cakes, this child." Fong Ling stared at his face in surprise. His eyes were very similar to Wen Liqing's. They were big and bright, but there was something between his brows that made him look like Dr. Wen. Lee Nanheng had already approached. Looking at the child in her arms, he was not surprised. He only said, "I didn't expect you to like children." Fong Ling. I saw that he almost pulled the tablecloth off just now, so I picked him up. Lee Nanheng did not say much. He glanced at the little thing in her arms, picked up a small triangular cake from the long table beside him, and handed it over. Looking at the little boy whose eyes lit up because the cake was delivered to his mouth, he raised his eyebrows and asked mildly, "Do you want to eat it?" Chapter 13:25. The little boy nodded with a smile. He looked extremely good-looking when he smiled. "Eat. Momo wants to eat. What's your name?" Lee Nanheng did not immediately hand the cake to him but raised his eyebrows and asked. Fong Ling frowned. "Lee Nanheng, don't look so cold. This child looks very young." He might not understand what you're asking. He's 2 years old. He can understand, Li Nanheng said lightly. He should be able to understand the simplest expression. How did he know this child was 2 years old? Feng Ling did not speak. She held the child and looked at his face. Can you understand what uncle is asking you? The little boy looked at the cake and then at Li Nanheng. He suddenly grinned, revealing a few white and cute little teeth. Momo. Momo? Feng Ling had heard him talking about Momo earlier and immediately touched his head. What a cute and obedient child. Where are your parents? Although she was somewhat suspicious of the figure outside who had suddenly left, she did not dare to believe it. Wen Liqing and Dr. Wen, they hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was impossible for a child to suddenly appear. What happened between the two of them 2 to 3 years ago? Did your mother bring you here? Li Nanheng asked again. The little boy had already answered his name. Seeing that he was still unwilling to give him the cake, he pursed his lips and turned to Feng Ling pleadingly. Sister. Momo wants cake. Uncle won't give it. Li Nanheng's expression instantly darkened. I'm an uncle. Is she my sister? Feng Ling reached out and snatched the cake from his hand. Why are you making things difficult for a child? He's already 30 years old. If he doesn't call you uncle, should he call you brother? If he really calls you brother, don't you feel embarrassed to answer? Li Nanheng. Feng Ling gave the cake to the little boy and had just placed him on a small sofa by the side so that he could eat in peace. At this moment, the phone in her pocket vibrated. She took out her phone and took a look. It was a message from Wen Liqing, whom she had not seen or contacted for a long time. How did Wen Liqing know her new number? He's called Wen Shumo. He's my son. He's 2 years old and 1 month old. He eats everything and is not picky. I really had no choice but to bring the child over when I knew you would be here tonight. However, it's not convenient for me to show myself. I'll explain it to you when I come back. Sorry to trouble you. Feng Ling, I have an urgent matter to attend to and need to leave America. Reading this message, Feng Ling turned to look at the little guy who had smeared the cream on the cake all over his face in the blink of an eye. Is he really Wen Liqing's child? Was he really 2 years old? She put down her phone and turned to look at Li Nanheng, who was also looking at the child. Do you know about Wen Liqing? When you're busy, I can arrange for bodyguards and servants to take care of him. My people will keep their mouths shut. Li Nanheng's eyes darkened. There was no one else in his eyes, nor was there any child. There was only Feng Ling, who was sitting by the sofa with some hesitation in her eyes. It was time to draw in the net. If he didn't draw in the net, she would really be used to running away. He wouldn't be able to catch her. Promise you'll get a room for him alone, not in your own room, Feng Ling said slowly. This way, it'll be more convenient for me to accompany him. What will happen if he goes to my room? Li Nanheng raised his brows unhappily. I helped you take in this child, and you're still bargaining with me? Do you really think I can't do anything to you just because I've given in to you time and time again? Your lifestyle isn't healthy. It will affect the child. Feng Ling casually found a reason. Li Nanheng glanced at her coldly. How is my lifestyle unhealthy? If you smoke, it'll easily affect the child's respiratory tract. Feng Ling continued to find excuses. Ha! Li Nanheng sneered. Give birth to one for me right now. I promise I'll quit smoking immediately. Yuzheng didn't know what CEO Li was going to do, but he only followed his request and walked with Miss Feng's sister. After going down the mountain, Li Nanheng said, Go to the Besiding Hotel and show her the way. All right. Yuzheng nodded and quickly sped up to drive in front of Feng Ling's car. Feng Ling followed their car from time to time. From time to time, she would look at the little guy who was sleeping, afraid that he was uncomfortable. The distance from the foot of the mountain to the besiding hotel was about 20 kilometers. The traffic in Washington was very good at this time, and there was no traffic jam. They arrived in about 20 minutes. Feng Ling stopped the car and carried the little guy over. Momo was full and sleeping soundly. He rested his head on her shoulder and leaned against her arms. He was carried out and did not wake up after getting out of the car. When Yuzheng got out of the car, he saw that Feng Ling had actually brought the child back. CEO Li seemed to know about it. He stood by the side and did not dare to ask. However, seeing that the child had fallen asleep, he took off his coat and handed it over. Miss Feng, children are afraid of the wind when they sleep. Put my coat on him. Feng Ling took it and thanked him. Then she turned to look at Li Nanheng, who had already gotten out of the car. The man closed the car door and was about to take a cigarette out of habit. When he turned back to meet Feng Ling's gaze, his hand paused in his pocket. He then calmly glanced at Yuzheng. Go to the top floor and get a room. Arrange for some people to go over and let the child stay there. Then find someone to take care of him. All right, CEO Li. Yuzheng didn't understand, but he didn't dare to ask. He nodded and quickly went in to make the arrangements. Go in. Li Nanheng's gaze fell on Feng Ling. Feng Ling did not speak. She carried little Momo and walked in. Seeing that she was reluctant to let go of the little boy, Li Nanheng's cold brows moved slightly. He reached out to take the child. Let me carry him. However, the little guy woke up at some point. After hearing his words, not only did he not let go of her, but his two chubby arms were tightly wrapped around Feng Ling's neck. He leaned into her arms and said softly, "No. I want my sister to carry me." Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling, smiled despite being strangled by the little boy, and his face darkened. Brat. Feng Ling carried Momo all the way to the room Li Nanheng had arranged. She didn't expect that although Li Nanheng looked like a domineering and cold man, he had carefully arranged a children's room. There were 2 beds, one big and one small, and a simple slide that children liked to play on. There were also some colorful wood and a small wooden horse in the corner. Feng Ling put Momo down, and the little thing excitedly paced around the room. He ran to play by himself, but because he was too young, his movements were a little clumsy. However, it was clear that when Liqing had brought him to the amusement park to play, he knew how to play. After sliding a few times, he excitedly ran to the other side to hug the building blocks and refused to let go. Seeing that the child was happy, Feng Ling felt that she did not let down when Liqing's rare request. Satisfied? Li Nanheng stood in front of the door with his arms crossed over his chest. He glanced indifferently at the little boy who was running around the room. Yuzheng listened by the side and thought that CEO Li could really break all precedents for this Miss Feng. CEO Li clearly hated children and didn't even have the patience to coax any child, but he could actually bring this child to his place because of Miss Feng's words. Feng Ling turned back to look at him. Satisfied. If you don't show up when I'm here to accompany him, I'll be even more satisfied. Li Nanheng snorted. Burn the bridge after crossing the river. Dream on. Chapter 13:27. She knew that he wouldn't do as she wished, so Feng Ling didn't waste any more time talking to him. She looked at little Momo and took a photo of the child playing happily. She lowered her head and fiddled with her phone before sending the photo to Wen Liqing. After sending it for a few minutes, she didn't receive a reply. Guessing that Wen Liqing probably didn't have time to look at her phone, Feng Ling put down her phone and continued to look at little Momo with a smile. It was already late at night when she returned from the banquet at the villa. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. After playing for a while, little Momo fell asleep on the wooden horse again. He didn't even take a shower. Feng Ling originally wanted to wake him up and help him take a shower before sleeping, but when she leaned over and saw the child's cute chubby face when he was sleeping, she saw that he looked very similar to Dr. Wen and Wenlicheng. She gradually retracted her hand that had just reached out to pat him awake. Instead, she picked up the child and placed him on the soft bed. She covered him with the blanket and sat on the bed to watch the little guy sleeping soundly. For some reason, her heart felt warm and comfortable. The world of children was so good. After watching for a while, Feng Ling stood up. The moment she turned around, she almost bumped into the man's arms. She abruptly took a step back, and the back of her leg hit the edge of the bed. Thankfully, her years of training had allowed her to stand steadily, so she did not fall back onto the bed. She paused and shifted her gaze to his face. "Why haven't you left yet? Did I say I was leaving? Then I'll go back first. I still have things to do at the company tomorrow. I still have to deal with TMing. I'll leave little Momo to you for now." With that, she turned to walk out. The man reached out and pulled her into his arms. "It's too late. Sleep here and go back tomorrow morning." "No, I have to go back to the company. Our company in Washington is temporary. After we get the financing, we have to return to New York. There are many things I need to look through," Feng Ling said indifferently. "You know that when I took over the phone corporation, the entire company had already collapsed. It wasn't easy for me to reorganize so many scattered companies. I need to keep an eye on them. After all, there will be problems in every subsidiary or small department. How many days have you not slept well since you came to Washington?" The man didn't seem to hear her and only looked down at her face. Feng Ling paused. "You know my temper. If I don't let you go, you won't be able to leave even if you want to. If you have the time to tangle with me, why don't you take a shower and go to bed early? If you have time tomorrow morning, you can drive back by yourself. If you don't have time, I'll send someone to drive you back. It won't delay anything for you." The man only wrapped his arm around her waist and did not do anything else that would make her angry. At the same time, he raised his cold brows slightly. "Or, how about I help you take off your clothes and shower, watch you sleep and accompany you to sleep?" Feng Ling didn't speak at first, but then she put down her hand. This action showed that she really didn't want to waste time here and chose to compromise. Li Nanheng finally let go of her and pointed to the bathroom with his chin. "Go take a shower." Feng Ling did not say much and went straight into the bathroom. After a simple shower, he came out in a bathrobe and saw the fruit platter and some simple snacks on the coffee table opposite the sofa in the suite. She didn't eat much at the banquet and only drank 2 glasses of red wine. Although she wasn't drunk, it was indeed uncomfortable to sleep on an empty stomach. Li Nanheng had already left, and there was only little Momo sleeping soundly on the bed in the room. Feng Ling glanced at the coffee table and went to get her phone. She then went to the sofa and sat down. She looked at her phone as she ate the fruit platter and snacks. Wenlicheng's reply came 5 minutes ago. "Wenlicheng, haha, thank you. He likes to play on the slide. He can play alone for an afternoon without feeling tired. If you're especially busy, you can let him play by himself. He won't disturb you." Feng Ling smiled and replied, "It's okay. I'm not afraid of being disturbed. When I'm really busy, I'll leave it to someone else to take care of him. Anyway, don't worry." Wenlicheng did not reply. Feng Ling put down her phone and continued to eat. There were 2 flavors of cake on the snack plate. One was the blueberry flavor that she always liked, and the other was the milk yellow flavor, which she suddenly fell in love with in the year she was in England. Li Nanheng actually knew about this. Feng Ling looked at the time as she ate the cake. It was getting late. She still had to return to the company tomorrow. After eating a few bites, she turned to brush her teeth and climbed into bed to hug little Momo to sleep. The child had a scent that adults did not have. It was very, very faint, but it made one feel inexplicably drowsy. It was as though the entire world had softened because of the child's breathing, and her heart had softened as well. The next morning, Feng Ling drove back to the company. As soon as she arrived at the company, she felt that something was wrong. There weren't many people who came to Washington with her, but almost everyone's faces were gloomy, as though something unpleasant had happened. When she walked into the office, she suddenly saw the LCD screen hanging above the office. In front of the Feng Corporation's headquarters in New York, there were live broadcast cars from various television stations surrounding the entire road. More and more people were watching the show. Feng Ling looked at the scene on the screen and heard the office door open again. Qin Shuk walked in. "You're back? If you hadn't sent me a message last night to report that you were safe, I would have brought the police to look for you." "You didn't come back last night," Qin Shuk said as she looked at the scene on the LCD screen. "The current situation in New York can't be suppressed any longer. After we came to Washington, I don't know who started a rumor in the company that the Feng Corporation is being targeted by the American financial circle. They probably can't continue operating. They also said that the company is going to lay off a large number of people. In addition, the order has been withdrawn and the stock matter. Right now, all the employees in the company are in danger. Some people have been incited to say that they want to." Hearing the hesitation in Qin Shuk's words, Feng Ling's brows twitched. "Want what?" "Continue." Needless to say, this news must have been caused by Feng Ming. Was he so afraid of being taken back by the Feng Corporation that he wanted to destroy the Feng Corporation first? It was indeed a good move to shake the morale of the employees. A few people with unstable mentalities were incited to jump off a building to threaten you, CEO Feng, to give up on the decision to lay off employees, Qin Shuk said as she sighed. Qin Shuk sighed as she spoke. This matter is really not right. Although the Feng Corporation hasn't been in a good state in the past few years, it has never been like this. Chapter 1328. Hearing this, Feng Ling did not say anything. She just looked at the situation on the screen and the live broadcast. A few minutes later, she said, "Shuk, send a notice to the company in New York in my name. Tell all the employees to put down their current work and turn on the computer in the office before they get off work. I have something important to announce." After speaking, Feng Ling looked at the Feng Corporation's office building in New York on the screen. Her voice was calm and steady. Even Qin Shuk, who was a little upset, calmed down. All right. It wasn't her first day following her. Qin Shuk believed that Feng Ling had a solution to the problem. She didn't say much and turned to do her work. The television was broadcasting the chaos on the Feng Corporation's building and the jumping off the building. Originally, it was just a case of a company employee wanting to jump off a building to threaten a senior executive. This kind of thing happened frequently in major cities, countries, and fields, and it was not worthy of so much attention. However, under the influence of some people secretly adding fuel to the fire, almost all the television media in New York were mobilized to broadcast this news. Li Nanheng sat in his office and watched this scene. His expression did not change. "Boss, do you want me to send someone from New York over?" Xiao Su stood by the side and asked in a low voice after watching for a while. "No need. If Feng Ling can't handle such a small matter herself, she wouldn't have integrated a company in just a few months," Li Nanheng said and turned to look at Yu Zheng. As Li Nanheng spoke, he turned to look at Yu Zheng. "Go monitor Tieming's movements. Don't interfere with the Feng Corporation's matters. Keep an eye on Tieming's people. This matter ends here. Don't let them have any chance to interfere." Yu Zheng nodded and left. Feng Mingyi really doesn't take Feng Ling seriously. He wants to use this method to force her to destroy the Feng Corporation. Since he wants to make the Feng Corporation his own, Isn't this stupid method hurting the enemy by 1,000 and hurting himself by 800? Xiao Su muttered. Li Nanheng didn't speak anymore. He just watched the television broadcast. It was clear that if no one had been stirring up trouble, things wouldn't have developed to this extent. If Feng Ling didn't have the time to deal with Tieming, he didn't mind killing him before her attention shifted to Feng Mingyi. If she was willing to accept his help, it would be fine. However, if he made a move and she found out one day, she would definitely not thank him. Instead, she would scold him for being stupid. After all, he was the one who forced her to return to the Feng family and forced her to grow up. In the end, he actually thought of ways to help her grow up. Just thinking about it, he knew that she would definitely not be nice to him. CEO Feng, should we ask someone to suppress the matter with the media first? There were a few executives by Feng Ling's side who were trying to come up with ideas, but in this situation, they were too far away from New York and could not help. Looking at Feng Ling, who was sitting behind the desk, the few loyal senior officials who had been in the company for many years saw the dark green seal in her hand. They all knew that it was something that grandfather Feng had personally placed in her hand when he handed over the company's power to her. This seal symbolized that the future of the Feng Corporation would fall on Feng Ling. It's not easy to suppress the media, Feng Ling said in a low voice. There was not a trace of nervousness on her fair face. Besides, if she only chose to suppress the media at this time and did not resolve the problem clearly, it would only be superficial. The people in the company would still be uneasy, and the company's image would also be severely damaged. It would be futile. She placed her hand on the dark green jade seal. In a moment, Feng Ling had already sorted out her emotions and stood up. She walked to the video camera that Qin Shuk had prepared to connect to the New York company. On the other side of the camera, countless media reporters were standing with the company's employees. The media soon discovered that Feng Ling had appeared. Countless cameras immediately focused on Feng Ling, who was far away in Washington. As for the employees present, no one cared about the situation. They only cared about whether they would be laid off and whether they would lose their jobs. Turn my camera to the employee on the rooftop who wants to jump off the building. Feng Ling faced the camera and her tone was cold. After she finished speaking, no one spoke for a while. A moment later, someone reacted and quickly brought the movable monitor to the rooftop. The employee who wanted to jump off the building was very agitated. He shouted that Feng Ling had recently gone to Washington and did not stay in New York. It must be because something had happened to the company. She was too weak to deal with it, so she hid in Washington, leaving the employees here to suffer losses. He cursed and cursed, unable to stop his agitation. I'm indeed in Washington. Although I can only face you in this way, at least this is a chance for you to face the person in charge of the company as a low-level employee. What do you want to say? I'll give you a chance to say it. Do you want to jump down to see the King of Hell? Or do you want to take a few steps back and communicate with me? Communicate like a normal person? Feng Ling's clear voice came from the monitor. The reporters who could see Feng Ling were also listening carefully. A cold breeze blew past the rooftop, and the agitated employee stood on the verge of collapse. Who wanted to die? No one wanted to. What they wanted was to let the company's higher-ups hear their voices. Although CEO Feng was not in New York, it could at least be considered a face-to-face method. The employee swallowed. The Feng Corporation situation hasn't been good in the past few years, but we old employees have worked hard to work here. We've never thought of changing jobs. So many people want to poach us, but we can't bear to leave. But you, Feng Ling, have only been in office for a few months. Now you want to lay off employees? Are you trying to hound us old employees to death? The employee's eyes turned red as he spoke. His emotions, which had calmed down, became much more agitated. When did I say I wanted to lay off employees? Feng Ling's expression was indifferent. The employee on the rooftop was startled. Feng Ling was very calm. Every word of hers was filled with calmness and sharpness. From the top management of the company to all the employees of the company, have you ever heard me mention the word layoff? I'm very curious who spread this rumor. You know that the phone corporation has been in a bad state for the past few years, but now the company has been going downhill. When it fell to the bottom, it didn't even think of laying off employees. Now that it's rising and needs a lot of manpower, would I lay off employees? Chapter 13:29. But the company's supervisors are also saying that the company is being targeted. It's a difficult thing to be targeted when you're on the rise. Everyone says that we can't hold on any longer. The employees on the rooftop tightly gripped the railings at the edge of the rooftop. Hearing this, Feng Ling coldly looked at the life-saving railing in his hand. I'm the CEO of the company. If I say I won't lay off the employees, I won't lay off the employees. Do the rumors they spread count, or do my words count? Feng Ling's voice was strong and clear. The employee on the rooftop knew that the camera was aimed at her. Her words were not only for him, but also for the thousands of employees of the company to see, so of course they counted. The restless employees in the other offices finally calmed down and believed that it was indeed just a rumor. You also know that the company is now being targeted. So this so-called targeting, in addition to blocking the various projects, is it possible that there is a psychological attack? Feng Ling said indifferently, although the rumors are small, they are fearsome. When all the employees of a company are in a state of panic and can't even carry out their normal work, how can they have the capital to turn the tables? I'm afraid they won't even be able to maintain the most basic business. The other party is the one who will really collapse. Will really lose completely. Feng Ling said coldly, now, I promise in front of all the employees of the company that I won't lay off anyone. In the future, if you hear any trouble, just call my private number to report it. If there are any problems, I'll use this method to explain to everyone. Rumors can not only destroy a person, but also a company. Most of you are old employees of the phone corporation. I believe that you pay more attention to your relationship with the company than a newcomer like me. Don't let these rumors destroy everyone's mentality at work. Now, maintain your original state and wait for me to return. In the end, Feng Ling's tone gradually softened, and her words were no longer as sharp. However, the old employees were filled with emotions. That's right. They had been in the phone corporation for many years, and their feelings for this place were too deep. At this moment, the staff on the rooftop nodded submissively and could only wipe their tears with emotion. They were no longer in the mood to seek death. It's just a small rumor crisis, but it has alarmed all the major media in New York. It's really my fault for causing everyone to panic like this. The responsibility is also mine. It's my responsibility. I solemnly declare that as long as I'm here, the phone corporation will not collapse, and I won't let you lose your jobs. In just a few words, Feng Ling had already instilled in everyone the idea that as long as she was there, they would definitely be able to keep their jobs. After she took over the company, although most of the employees accepted this new president, many of the old people actually didn't take this young man seriously. And in this small crisis, the collapse of the employees' confidence was quietly resolved, and at the same time, Feng Ling's image as the new CEO became stronger in front of all the new and old employees. In the phone corporation's office building in New York, the employees in the office gradually returned to their posts to continue working, and the media gradually retreated. As they did not capture any surprising news, a big matter that had been stirred up became a small dispute in a company, so no media was willing to spread it around. An hour later, Feng Ling heard Qin Shuk's report and finally heaved a sigh of relief in her heart when she heard that the matter had calmed down. Although it's only a small dispute, stabilizing the employees' moods and calming things down is more important than explaining to the media. Feng Ling has clearly found the main point. Xiao Su commented, I didn't expect Feng Ling to have changed so much after leaving the base for just 2 to 3 years. Her heart is stronger than before, and she has indeed become more stable. If Feng Ling was only an outstanding member of 11 base back then, it can be said that her wings have hardened a lot, and she has indeed grown up. Xiao Su looked at Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng's ink-black eyes were fixed on Feng Ling's face on the screen. He did not shift his gaze away from her for even a minute. She's still immature, but at least she's more stable and calm than I imagined. After a long while, when everything on the screen ended, Li Nanheng's thin lips moved slightly. It's already very good. It's only been 2 to 3 years. You can't expect her to reach the level of a first-class enterprise management in 2 to 3 years, but it's already very good that she used the most appropriate method to resolve the crisis. Li Nanheng played with the remote control in his hand. Isn't the most appropriate way to run over to me and ask me to help her? Hug my leg and shout for hubby to help me? Xiao Su, Feng Ling had been busy in the company for 2 days and had barely left the company. She lived in the company because she did not want to contact CEO E anymore. However, right now, the phone corporation was on the rise. No matter what, she had to obtain other resources. Otherwise, not only would she have come to Washington for nothing, but she would also have lost a lot. Have you really never considered asking Li Nanheng to help you? Right now, the phone corporation needs to rope in people everywhere, but isn't the most direct way to rope in the Li Corporation? Li Nanheng is really crucial to this matter. Don't give him a cold war anymore. Soften up a little and express your stance to him. The phone corporation won't be so bumpy. Qin Shuk knew that Feng Ling didn't like to hear this, but she had no choice but to suggest softly. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't speak, Qin Shuk sighed again. In the past, I wasn't very familiar with Li Nanheng. In my impression, I often heard cousin Mingzhu talk about him, but the Li Nanheng I heard is a very cold, difficult to approach, and bad-tempered man. However, from you, I feel that he's a man who loves you very much. No matter what, instead of pleasing so many people like CEO E, you might as well smile at Li Nanheng. This is more useful than anything else. Feng Ling pursed her lips and glanced at her. Qin Shuk decided not to speak, but when she turned to walk out of the office, she muttered softly, "You're so patient with CEO E and the other bosses. You often smile at others, but you might not be able to achieve your goal. Those cooperation cases might not fall into your hands, but if you treat Li Nanheng like this, I'm afraid he can send the whole world to you." The office door opened and closed. The room was silent. Feng Ling lowered her head and continued to work. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. Chapter 1330. The person who called was Mr. Mike's assistant. He asked Feng Ling if she had time to go to Mr. Mike's resort this weekend. This was something that had been agreed upon at the reception a few days ago. Of course, Feng Ling had already set aside the weekend. However, because the weekend was specially free, she was especially busy in the past few days, so she didn't have much chance to visit little Momo. She could only occasionally confirm the child's safety based on the photos and text messages sent by the people taking care of little Momo in the hotel. In fact, there was nothing to confirm. After all, he was with Li Nanheng, and his safety was guaranteed. She only needed to make sure that the child was eating well and sleeping well. She wouldn't worry, nor would she worry when Licheng, who had just left America. The weekend. This time, Feng Ling did not go alone. Instead, she brought Qin Shuk to Mr. Mike's resort. After all, Mr. Mike was an outstanding figure in the American-Chinese business world. He was also a legendary figure in the older generation of the business world. He had hundreds of billions of assets under his name. Resorts that covered millions of square meters in the suburbs of Washington could be found all over the world. Furthermore, the decorations in each resort were luxurious, causing everyone who came in to be amazed. In this huge resort, there were all kinds of stadiums, entertainment venues, swimming pools, hot springs, sweatshops, fitness facilities, and so on. Mr. Mike invited everyone to come and arranged rooms for everyone. He asked everyone to stay here for the night to taste the 3 meals and service standards of the resort under his name. This is a true rich person. Qin Shuk walked beside Feng Ling, and the two of them retreated from the crowd in front of them. She whispered to Feng Ling, "I heard that Mr. Mike's assets have long surpassed Bill Gates, but he has never announced his assets to the public. Although he is famous in the business world, because he is too low-key, he has always been an invisible tycoon that everyone in the industry knows about. If it's the world capital, I think Mr. Mike is more qualified. Look here, this taste, this vision, and the one in front, it looks like a building decoration, but it's actually a statue of a severed arm from ancient Rome in the 80s. This kind of statue is enough to support a company that is about to go public, not to mention here. Look, there are so many of them. Many of them are from the last century. This is only the villa district in Washington. There will probably be many villas in other places. This shows that Mr. Mike is really super rich. This shows that Mr. Mike is really super rich." Feng Ling did not know much about these things, but Qin Shuk had studied abroad and had seen and heard a lot. Feng Ling only knew about these things after hearing them. She turned to look at the ancient Roman statue and asked softly, "Is it so expensive?" "Of course, a statue from the 80s. Do you think this is a joke?" Qin Shuk smacked her lips as she spoke. But then again, with the phone corporation's current reputation and situation, it's really an honor to be invited by Mr. Mike. This time, Feng Ling did not say anything. She only glanced at Mr. Mike, who was chatting and laughing with the people around him. His reputation is indeed great in the business circle, but Mr. Mike from America and Mr. Zand from England, who do you think is better? As she spoke, in order not to let others hear, Feng Ling leaned slightly to Qin Shuk's ear. "I think Mr. Zand is slightly better." Qin Shuk's lips twitched. "You're always so protective of your own people. No matter how powerful Mr. Zand is, he's so much younger than Mr. Mike. He's still a junior, and we're juniors among juniors. Mr. Mike is a legend, okay? When I was studying abroad, I saw Mr. Mike's photo in foreign textbooks. He's really a legend. No wonder you insisted on coming with me to the resort this time. So Mr. Mike is your idol?" Feng Ling glanced at her. Qin Shuk snorted. "Although there is indeed a reason, it's more because I want to accompany you, okay? I want to see if Li Nanheng will bring little brother K out. I heard that little brother K rarely returns to 11 base and often walks outside. Perhaps he's following Li Nanheng now." Feng Ling chuckled and turned to walk in. Most of the people who came today were the group of people who were at CEO Yi's villa that day, but there were also some people Feng Ling had never seen before. However, it was obvious that their roles were not simple. Occasionally, when she heard their conversations as they passed by her, she could vaguely hear the companies they were talking about. When she heard the names of 2 very large groups in America, Feng Ling turned to look at them. Unexpectedly, the people from EDK Group and AW Group were also invited. It was said that even Shine Group had been invited. However, the MO family did not send anyone, and even Director MO did not appear. Almost all of the leaders of the top companies in the American Chinese community had arrived. It could be seen that Mr. Mike's strength could not be underestimated. What was the saying again? If you wanted to gain a foothold in a place, you had to pay respect to the doc first. Mr. Mike was this doc. However, although the old man accepted the initiative and fawning of so many people, he did not seem to pay much attention to this. For example, Feng Ling had not appeared in front of the old man before, nor had she greeted him. She was not like some of the female CEOs present who had been chatting with the old man with a smile and trembling. However, the old man did not seem to be affected by this. Feng Ling, who had not even smiled, was also included. She toured the resort. Every few steps, she could see various extravagant garden designs, as well as various souvenirs and ornaments worth over 100 million yuan. After walking for a long time, she walked into the front hall. Feng Ling stood at the back and did not squeeze forward, but she could hear Mr. Mike's voice coming from the microphone. His voice was old but powerful, and his opening remarks were exciting. When Feng Ling turned to look at the old man again, she accidentally met the ink-black eyes of the man sitting at the end of the seat. She paused and looked at Li Nanheng for a few seconds. She saw that the man, who was originally cold and indifferent to everything around him, seemed to have a faint smile in his eyes. If you smile at Li Nanheng like this, I'm afraid he can send the whole world to you. Qin Shuk's words suddenly reverberated in his ears. Feng Ling abruptly retracted her gaze, but even if she did not look at him, she could feel that the man did not withdraw his gaze through the crowd. Chapter 1331. Everything was peaceful in the resort, but Feng Ling vaguely felt that something was amiss. Li Nanheng was used to holding a cigarette in his right hand and holding a cigarette in his right hand. Earlier, after coming out of the stadium, everyone was about to return to their rooms to change into light clothes so that they could relax here comfortably. She accidentally turned her head and saw that he was holding a cigarette in his left hand while his right hand was by his side. Feng Ling's sharp gaze landed on Li Nanheng's right hand. He was wearing a suit shirt and his sleeves covered his arm. She couldn't see anything. "What are you looking at?" Qin Shuk gently pushed her from behind. "Let's go and change. After entering the phone corporation with you, I haven't had the chance to go anywhere for a relaxing vacation. Now that I'm here, let's relax for 2 days. Shall we go to the hot spring later? Ah, by the way, I heard that the hot spring here is the type of hot spring plaza. It's not like the hot spring hotels outside, which are hidden and separated. The hot springs here are all in the same place, one small pool next to another. Thankfully, the swimsuits I brought are all conservative. Otherwise, those stinky men would have seen them all," Qin Shuk said as she pulled Feng Ling away. "I won't change into my swimsuit. Isn't there an office area beside the hot spring pool? I'll turn on the computer and accompany you. You still have to work when you're on vacation?" "I'm not interested in hot springs," Feng Ling said indifferently and entered the room. Qin Shuk knew her personality. Once she made up her mind, it was useless to persuade her. She simply changed into her swimsuit. Seeing that Feng Ling really took out her laptop, she was speechless. "You really brought the laptop over? There are still some project documents I haven't read. I can accompany you while taking a look. Usually, I don't have the time to read these project documents. Today is just right." "All right then." When they arrived at the hot spring pool, there were indeed many small pools of nearly 1,000 square meters that had been modified on the flat ground. There were all kinds of colors, and the water was very clean. There were also all kinds of blue swimming pools around them. The contours of the swimming pools were all kinds of beautiful and exquisite shapes. Qin Shuk chose an aromatherapy hot spring pool. Coincidentally, there was no one in the small pool. There was a table and chairs beside the pool that could be used for work. Feng Ling placed the computer there, but Qin Shuk couldn't bear to watch her sitting here busy with work. She coaxed her into soaking her feet and even helped move the table and chair over. In the end, Feng Ling didn't refuse. She placed the table against the pool, rolled up her pants, and placed her calves into the hot spring water. As she soaked her feet, she turned slightly to look at the project documents on the computer. It was indeed very comfortable. Qin Shuk was also comfortable now. She soaked in the water and talked to her. Not long after, about half of the celebrities in the American Chinese circle who came here for vacation came here. Many people wanted to go to the gym to play for a while before coming. At this time, most of the women came. Everyone had nothing to do in their own pools. Occasionally, some people would talk about the recent events in the circle, and some people would whisper about which military base Li Nanheng was in. There were many different opinions about the Li family. CEO Li, walk slowly. CEO Li, do you not have a girlfriend? Do you mind finding a younger one? I've heard my father mention you. I like your personality, family background, and experience. If you don't accept me now, it's fine. Give me your number. Let's be friends first. CEO Li, do you have a girlfriend? Do you mind finding a younger one? Li Nanheng's eyes lit up, and he looked at Li Nanheng, who had just come out of the villa room in the resort. She followed him all the way. It's fine if you don't accept me now. Give me your number. We can be friends first. Li Nanheng was expressionless the entire time. He did not even look at the noisy girl who had been following him. Seeing that he did not even respond, the young lady of the O Corporation was not discouraged. She quickly followed his footsteps. Really, don't think I'm young. Although I'm 18 years old, I'm already very mature. I can also get married at this age in America. Assistant Yu Zheng, CEO Li, hey, CEO Li, don't ignore me. The young lady of the O family could not catch up to him, so she quickly jogged to catch up to him. Then, she blocked in front of Li Nanheng and stretched out her arms to raise her head to look at the tall and cold man in front of her. Finally, he glanced at her because of her sudden movement. The moment their eyes met, the young lady of the O family felt as though her heart had been struck. Her cheeks instantly heated up, and her voice trembled nervously. I just want to get to know you, and they all said that you don't have a girlfriend. Since you don't have a girlfriend, it's not a problem for me to chase you, right? I don't usually talk so much. I just want to get to know you, CEO Li, look. Li Nanheng looked at the young lady of the O family who was wearing a pink lace bikini in front of him. His expression did not change. Not interested. I'll be interested once I get to know you. The young lady of the O family smiled and was about to approach him. Her face was still a little red. However, the moment she approached, the man frowned. He took a step to the side and turned to walk in another direction. Hey, you? The young lady of the O family turned around and saw that she really couldn't tease this man. She immediately stomped her feet in anger and quickly ran after him. She didn't expect CEO Li to also go to the hot spring. The young lady of the O family happened to change into a swimsuit and wanted to go over. She happily moved forward and followed behind him as she said, CEO Li is going to the hot spring too? I'm going too. Why didn't you change your clothes? Li Nanheng acted as though he didn't hear her and walked forward. Yu Zheng couldn't help but whisper, Miss O, our CEO Li has something to do there. Mr. Mike has asked CEO Li to have tea in the tea room next door, not to soak in the hot spring. Of course, he doesn't need to change his clothes. Oh, tea. I can drink tea too. CEO Li, I'll drink with you. As they spoke, they had already walked near the hot spring. They happened to pass by a small path to the tea room. Right now, the small path was filled with water. The young lady of the O family was focused on the tall man in front of her and didn't pay attention. She slipped and suddenly screamed. With a plop, she fell into the pool that was about 1.8 meters deep. The young man said anxiously. Hurry up and save him, GM Li. Oh, I won't either. Yu Zheng almost laughed out loud. More and more people gathered here. Li Nanheng glanced at the young lady of the O family who was lying there and said without changing his expression, "I remember that CEO Chen is a famous swimming enthusiast in the circle. He must be quite proficient in artificial respiration. Let CEO Chen do it." The young man turned to look. CEO Chen had a fat head and big ears. He was wearing tight black swimming trunks and was in his 40s. His face was covered with all kinds of red and unhealthy red pimples. They were of different sizes, and his face was dripping with water. When he heard this, he rushed forward to help save her. However, the young lady of the O family, who was still lying there, suddenly coughed at this moment. She quickly sat up before CEO Chen came over to help her with artificial respiration. She turned to look at Li Nanheng awkwardly, but Li Nanheng had already left without looking back. The hot spring pool where Feng Ling and Qin Shuk were in was relatively far from the swimming pool, so she was not clear about what was happening over there. Feng Ling was focused on the project documents on the computer, while Qin Shuk was drowsy in the pool. From beginning to end, she did not notice the boring episode over there. After returning to her room from the hot spring pool, Qin Shuk still wanted to go play golf. This time, Feng Ling did not accompany her. Seeing that she had been busy at the hot spring pool for the entire afternoon, Qin Shuk did not force her. She only told Feng Ling to remember to order some food for her when it was dinner time and left. Feng Ling turned off the computer and looked at the time. It was 5:00 in the afternoon. It was probably dinner time at 6 o'clock. After thinking for a moment, she called Li Nanheng, but he did not answer. She called Yu Zheng and learned that Li Nanheng had just returned to his room and was probably resting. After confirming that Li Nanheng was in his room, Feng Ling got up and walked out. Mr. Mike's resort was very big. It took more than 10 minutes to walk from her resort villa to Li Nanheng's villa. After entering, Yu Zheng saw her and quickly greeted her politely. "Miss Feng. Is he still in the room?" "Yes, but CEO Li just said he wanted to rest." "Are you looking for him, Miss Feng?" Feng Ling nodded but did not explain. Yu Zheng was about to say something when he suddenly saw that she was holding a box of medicine in her hand. He immediately shut his mouth. He didn't expect that this Miss Feng, who usually looked cold and unapproachable, was quite observant. She could actually see that CEO Li's arm was injured. "Do you have a room card?" Feng Ling asked. Oh, yes. After all, Yu Zheng had personally seen how much CEO Li cared about Feng Ling. If it was anyone else, he definitely wouldn't dare to hand over the room card, but if it was Miss Feng, of course, it was a different story. After receiving the room card from Yu Zheng, Feng Ling thanked him and went to Li Nanheng's room. She gently knocked on the door twice, but no one responded. She swiped the card and went in. After entering, she heard the sound of water splashing from the bathroom. Feng Ling turned her gaze over and saw that although there was the sound of water, the bathroom door was open. As soon as she walked over, she saw the man standing inside, who was using his left hand to change his shirt with some difficulty. The shirt he had just changed into was stained with blood and was being washed underwater. He had just put on his new shirt, but because his left hand was not convenient, he had not buttoned it up. Suddenly hearing her approaching footsteps, the man in the bathroom abruptly raised his eyes and met her gaze. As expected, he hadn't used his right hand today because his arm was injured. Feng Ling walked over with the medicine. "How did you get injured?" Chapter 1333. Li Nanheng looked at her for a moment, then lowered his head to look at his arm. He gently moved it twice, silently indicating that the injury was not serious. "It's okay. It's not a big problem. It's just a superficial wound." "A superficial wound will make you unable to move your entire right hand for a day?" Feng Ling had been injured before. She wouldn't be fooled so easily. She walked in and stood in front of him. "Raise your hand. Let me take a look." Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at the woman who had already approached. He glanced at her long hair hanging behind her shoulders and then at her soft and comfortable clothes. It was clear that she had just returned to her room and was about to rest, but she suddenly came to his place. He smiled. "Did you specially come to care about me?" Feng Ling did not answer. She watched as he still did not dare to move his arm. She reached out and tugged at the unbuttoned sleeve of his shirt. When she saw that there was a circle of white gauze wrapped around it, extending from his wrist to his elbow, it could be seen that the area of the wound was very large. She paused and then raised her eyes to look at him. "How did you get hurt?" Meeting her sharp gaze, Li Nanheng smiled lightly. "I met a sworn enemy from when I was on a mission in the base. The other party discovered my current whereabouts, and their revenge could be seen everywhere. I'm outside, unlike in the base. There are many things that I need to personally appear to ask about. No matter how careful I am, I will inevitably be ambushed. When I was surrounded, the other party had knives in their hands. Before I broke out of the encirclement, I was inevitably cut twice on my arm. Fortunately, the bones were not broken, but the cuts were a little deeper. If that was the case, the medicine she brought would be useless." Feng Ling placed the tube of wound medicine in her hand on the marble table beside the sink. "Since you know you're being followed by your sworn enemy, why didn't you transfer people from the base over? Didn't you even arrange for a bodyguard to come to the resort this time?" Li Nanheng smiled. "Even bodyguards can't beat me. Why do I need them? At least there are more people. If something really happens, you don't have to break out of the encirclement alone. The people around you are all in the business circle. Assistant you probably doesn't know what to do when he encounters such a thing. Can't you arrange a few more people around you? Why didn't Xiao Su follow you?" As Feng Ling spoke, she raised her hand to touch the gauze on his arm, but her fingers stopped a centimeter away. Afraid that she would hurt him, she simply put her hand down. "Do you really care about me?" The man looked down at her with a deep smile in his eyes. Feng Ling looked at him coldly. "I noticed that there seems to be something wrong with your arm today. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened." Coming over to ask is also a form of concern. Li Nanheng smiled with satisfaction. "What should I do? It's probably because I've been ignored by you for too long. You just came over to look at me, and I'm so satisfied that I'm about to swell up." Feng. Crazy. Now that she had seen it, she knew what kind of injury it was and how it was injured. There was nothing to doubt. This kind of simple medicine was useless. She should just leave and go back to her room. Now that she had seen it, she knew what kind of injury it was and how it was injured. "Aren't you afraid that the wound will get infected?" she said in a muffled voice. "Did you bring medicine and gauze over? I'll help you deal with it. Didn't you change the medicine on your arm when you came? It's still wet. Aren't you afraid that the wound will get infected?" she said in a muffled voice. "Did you bring medicine and gauze over? I'll help you deal with it." Li Nanheng looked down at her and did not speak. Feng Ling looked up at him. "I'm talking to you, Li Nanheng." "Ah, yes, I brought it, but I'll call you Zhengin. Don't reach out." Li Nanheng smiled. He was still smiling. Feng Ling rolled her eyes at him and did not waste any more time talking to him. She turned to look for Yu Zheng and asked for 2 kinds of medicine and gauze from him before returning. Seeing that the man was still standing in the bathroom, she wanted to call him out, but thinking that it was convenient to wash there, she walked into the bathroom, placed the things aside, and gestured for him to raise his hand. Li Nanheng looked at her for a while and did not resist. He raised his arm and handed it to her. Afraid of hurting him, she carefully untied the gauze. As she untied it, she saw that more and more blood seeped out. When the entire gauze was removed, she saw the 2 bone-deep wounds on his arm. Each one was about 7 or 8 centimeters long. With such deep wounds, no matter how good the medicine was, there would still be a lot of blood. Besides, he didn't rest at home even though he was injured. He actually came to this resort to participate in all kinds of social activities. Didn't she say that he didn't show up for these small activities? Feng Ling guessed a possibility. She only used a towel to avoid his wound and wiped the blood off his arm. Then she used a medical disinfectant cotton to wipe his wound clean. She picked up the medicine she brought and compared it with the medicine Yu Zheng had given her. She compared the effect of the two before helping him apply the medicine. The wound was so deep that it would definitely hurt a lot when applying the medicine, but Li Nanheng didn't seem to feel the pain. He just looked at her and watched her apply the medicine for him. It was as though all the time in this world had stopped. It was as though all he wanted was for Feng Ling to be safe in front of him. When she helped him wrap the gauze again, Li Nanheng suddenly smiled. "What are you smiling at?" Feng Ling glanced at him in confusion. "It's been so long since you've touched these wounds. Your bandaging skills are not bad." "You're not rusty," the man commented. Feng Ling didn't speak but continued to slowly bandage him. Although she had already left the circle and no longer had her friends and brothers get injured like before, and in this circle, it wasn't her body that got hurt, but her mind, after all, had already been deeply rooted in her bones. Although she hadn't touched these things for a long time, it didn't mean that she would forget how to bandage them. Although she hadn't touched them for a long time, it didn't mean that she would forget how to bandage them. "Li Nanheng, I suggest you arrange some bodyguards by your side. Didn't you bring 2 last time at the villa? Why didn't you bring them to the resort this time? If I knew you were here, why would I bring bodyguards? If the 2 of us work together, how many people can beat us?" She didn't know if the man was joking or serious, but when Feng Ling looked at him, she saw that his gaze and expression were serious. W. 4M. Chapter 1334. Feng Ling sneered and pointed at his bandaged arm. "You're injured like this, and it's your right arm. Even if you fight me now, you might not be able to defeat me. Who do you think you are when your right arm can't exert any strength? You don't even have a foothold. I can knock you down in a few moves." "Really? It's been a long time since I've seen it. Why don't you try knocking me down now?" The man lowered his head and leaned close to her. Feng Ling raised her hand and pushed his forehead. "I'm being serious. Don't get so close to me." "I'm not being serious." Li Nanheng raised his brows and suddenly glanced meaningfully at the bed outside the bathroom. "Otherwise, what do you think I meant by do it? Did you think wrongly?" Li Nanheng. Feng Ling looked at him coldly. The man raised his brows. I'm listening." Feng Ling didn't want to talk to him anymore. She lowered her head to help him tie the gauze properly. After confirming that it was much better and that the gauze wouldn't be torn open because he was changing back and forth, she raised her head. "All right, be careful. Don't touch the water again." As she spoke, she turned to take the shirt out of the sink. However, as she turned around, her long hair suddenly hooked onto the 2 buttons on the front of his shirt. She abruptly turned around and felt a pain on her head. She immediately paused and turned back in surprise. Li Nanheng also immediately lowered his head to look. "Why are you entangled?" At this moment, Feng Ling also glanced sideways and saw that a few strands of her hair were entangled in the buttons of his shirt. She quickly took a step back, but this time, she happened to bump into the man's arms. She raised her hand to pull her hair down, but Li Nanheng raised his hand at the same time. Don't pull so hard. Your hair will break." He had known Feng Ling for so many years, but this was the first time he had made such a scene because of her hair. Li Nanheng didn't know whether to cry or laugh. His right arm was inconvenient, so he could only raise his left hand to try to untie her hair. Wait a minute. Don't move. Let me do it. Feng Ling could only stand there without moving. She felt the man's hand carefully unraveling her hair, but after waiting for a few minutes, there was no effect. She turned her head again, but because of this movement, Li Nanheng suddenly frowned. I told you not to move. I was just about to untie it, but when I moved, it became even tighter. Feng Ling. It was not convenient for her to turn her head like this. No matter how long her hair was, it was not particularly long. When she turned her head like this, she could only see from the corner of her eye where it was entangled. However, it was actually quite difficult for her to turn around and untie it herself, unless her entire body was completely pressed against his arms. But even if she really pressed against him, she could not raise her hand to untie it. The man frowned. His left hand was not as nimble as his right hand to untie things. When she suddenly turned around, the ends of her hair that were about to be untied tightened again. This time, it was as though he had tied a dead knot. Can you untie it or not? If you can't, just break it. Feng Ling saw that he had been untying it for a long time and frowned. There's no need. Li Nanheng lowered his head and said seriously, such beautiful hair. My heart will ache if I break even one strand of it. Then you really don't have to. Normal people will lose dozens of hairs on average every day. No matter how good my hair is, I'm still a normal person. Do you have to feel sorry for me every day? As Feng Ling spoke, she reached out to pick up the small scissors she had used to cut the gauze and handed it to him. Just cut that strand. Li Nanheng didn't even look at the scissors she handed him. He only said, no. Feng Ling glanced at him. You did it on purpose? The man still lowered his head and seriously untied her hair. Your hair is on your body. How could I do it on purpose? Feng Ling, she didn't speak. Anyway, she would untie it sooner or later. She stood there silently and let him untie it. However, her hair was a little wavy now. It was easy for it to become a dead knot if she accidentally wrapped it around his buttons. Li Nanheng didn't want to break her hair. It took him more than 10 minutes to untie one button. There was another button that was even tighter. He continued to untie it. At this moment, there was suddenly a knock on the door. Yu Sheng's voice came from outside. CEO Li, Mr. Mike is here. He's outside. He wants to see you. Mr. Mike? He came at this time? Feng Ling's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Mike was a famous figure in the American business circle. More importantly, she wasn't familiar with him. Mr. Mike had probably only heard some rumors about her and Li Nanheng, but people at his age didn't care much about these rumors. However, if he saw her tugging at the disheveled Li Nanheng in the bathroom, would she still be able to survive in the business world in the future? She quickly tried to tear off the strand of hair. Seeing her motive, Li Nanheng frowned and pressed her down. It's too late for you to go out now. Don't pull. Feng Ling turned to look at him, frowned, and lowered her voice. What do we do now? It won't matter if I'm seen. I'm unmarried and you're unmarried. Everyone outside says that I'm your fiancé. What are you afraid of? The man looked confident. Feng Ling glared at him. I don't want to be seen. Then hide. When Li Nanheng heard the sound of the door, he immediately lowered the bathroom curtain and pushed Feng Ling in. Then he stood outside the curtain and lowered his head to untie her hair. How can I hide like this? Feng Ling didn't understand, but she had already entered behind the curtain. Her body was blocked by the curtain, and only a strand of hair was pulled on his button. However, the man's body also blocked this side. His back was facing the outside of the bathroom, so he shouldn't be able to see anything. After all, this was Mr. Mike's place. Yuzheng only knocked on the door to inform him and couldn't say too much to stop him. Mr. Mike had already walked in. Hearing the footsteps outside and Mr. Mike's smiling voice, Feng Ling suddenly became nervous. If it was just the two of them talking in the room, it would be fine. However, Li Nanheng's shirt was not buttoned and his clothes were disheveled. She also came in her underwear and did not look like she was here to talk about work. Furthermore, she was in the bathroom with her hair tangled up. It looked as ambiguous as it could be. Especially now that she was still hiding behind the curtain of the bathroom. If she was discovered in this situation, there was no guarantee that she would be in trouble. She looked around the bathroom, but there was no other place to hide behind the curtain. "Don't move." Li Nanheng shouted in a low voice that only she could hear. His fingers continued to fight on his button. W. 4M. Chapter 1335. Feng Ling had no choice but to stop moving. When Mr. Mike had already walked out of the bathroom, Feng Ling's entire body tensed up. Coincidentally, at this moment, Li Nanheng tugged down the buttons on his shirt with force. Feng Ling's hair instantly regained its freedom. She took a step back into the curtain and the curtain blocked her. At this moment, Li Nanheng turned to look at the person outside the bathroom. He was still holding the button that he had just pulled off. Mr. Mike looked at Li Nanheng in surprise. "What's wrong?" "I was slightly injured. I just bandaged it." Li Nanheng's expression was calm and indifferent, as though there was nothing behind the curtain. He turned around and walked out. At the same time, he casually tugged at the collar of his shirt. "It's not convenient to wear clothes with my left hand. I just put on the shirt, but the button scratched a hook in the bathroom and was torn off. I have to change into another one later. It's troublesome." Mr. Mike finally understood. "I see. Then change your clothes first." Li Nanheng responded indifferently. He turned around to get another shirt and changed into it. During this time, Mr. Mike asked if he needed help. Li Nanheng sighed and smiled. "It's fine, there's no need." Feng Ling frowned when she heard this. Why was he still trying to be brave? Since it was inconvenient for his left hand, he asked Mr. Mike to help him wear it. The old man didn't even mind, but he was trying to be brave himself. After listening for a while, she suddenly heard Li Nanheng close the bathroom door outside. It was good to close it. This way, she wouldn't be too stiff inside. She heard the man's footsteps getting further and further away. His room was quite big, and there were a few suites suitable for drinking tea and talking. He probably went there. Feng Ling walked out from behind the curtain and leaned against the bathroom door to listen for a while. She hesitated if she should leave now, but if she bumped into Mr. Mike or Mr. Mike's secretary and assistant saw her outside, forget it. She turned back to look at the shirt in the sink. She took advantage of the soundproofing of the bathroom and walked over to wash the shirt. Although this kind of high-end shirt couldn't be washed, it was already soaked in water anyway. He couldn't take it out dripping wet. He had to wash it first. Otherwise, there was nothing to do. Qin Shuk sent her a message asking if she had rested. Feng Ling replied that she was outside and not in the room. If she wanted to eat anything for dinner, she could order it in the kitchen of the resort later. Qin Shuk then sent another photo. In the photo was her gym in the resort. Many young handsome men were exercising there. She specially took a few photos of them and sent them to her. "I didn't expect that the big shots in the business circle that Mr. Mike invited weren't all bald old men with beer bellies. There were also so many handsome young men with good figures." Feng Ling looked at it speechlessly and replied, "You playboy, don't you want your little brother K anymore?" K is on missions all day and is busy in the base. He's so straight that it's scary. When I'm free, I send him a message to ask him out for a meal, but he's embarrassed. He's too boring. Although he's handsome, he's not suitable for me. How can there be that many interesting men? Yes, yes. Look at this. Chin Shuk sent another photo of a young man's back. Isn't this handsome? Phone Ling, it's just a back. You're asking me if he's handsome? I've seen the front, but he's talking to someone with his back to me. It's not appropriate for me to take a photo from the front, right? Chin Shuk continued, I heard that he's from China. He seems to be the current head of the Ling Xiao group. His name is something like Xiao. Xiao something. I heard him talking to those celebrities. I feel that this man is super charming. I just don't know if he's married. Ling Xiao group? Phone Ling's hand that was holding the phone paused for a moment as though she had thought of something. Xiao Li. Ah, yes, 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 this little brother's background is very wild. His name is also so wild, ha ha ha. He clearly doesn't look easy to get along with, but his words are very humorous. I think he's something. Phone Ling sighed with a smile. Wasn't this the person who Jin Wan had secretly discussed with her as her biological brother? Later, it seemed that he was indeed her biological brother. It was said that this young master of the Xiao family was not someone to be trifled with. His temper was very bad. The point was, why did she remember that this young master of the Xiao family had some conflicts with Qin Sighting? Control yourself. Don't flirt with just anyone. Phone Ling could only say this to her. Io, don't worry. I'm reliable. Was Chin Shuk reliable? The little love-struck fool who couldn't move when she saw a good-looking man. Phone Ling chuckled inwardly. Mr. Mike sat with Li Nanheng for about an hour. She didn't know what they talked about. Later, Phone Ling really had nothing to do in the bathroom, so she took out her phone and played various small games that Chin Shuk had downloaded for her. She had never played these before and thought it was very simple, but in the end, she found that she knew nothing about them. She couldn't even pass the various checkpoints. She was using the little person in her phone to try her best to jump up, but she failed again and again. Suddenly, the bathroom door was pulled open. The first thing Li Nanheng saw when he opened the door was Phone Ling, who was usually cold and avoiding people, squatting in the bathroom and playing small games on her phone. She was playing very seriously. The man raised his good-looking eyebrows. Seeing that she hadn't noticed that he had come in, he walked over and bent down behind her. Press left, left, up. Yes, left, left, right. Change to the right this time. Yes, 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 just like this. Keep your fingers pressed down and don't let go. Right. Phone Ling kept jumping up according to Li Nanheng's instructions. When the words finally appeared on her phone, she let out a long breath and suddenly paused. She turned her eyes abruptly and almost hit the man's chin. Li Nanheng was bending down to look at her. When he suddenly turned his head and looked at her closely, the man raised his eyebrows. Phone Ling quickly stood up, but after squatting for a long time, her legs were a little numb. She reached out to the marble platform by the side, stabilized her body, and put the phone back into the small pocket of her clothes. She then looked out. Mr. Mike left? He left. Then I should go too. Phone Ling glanced at his arm again. He was wearing a shirt and she couldn't see the gauze inside. However, he didn't touch the water and didn't make any big movements. She walked around him and walked out. However, she had only taken 2 or 3 steps when the man stretched out his long arm and held her with his injured arm. He pulled her back. Phone Ling noticed his arm and subconsciously didn't dare to struggle too hard. She quickly stabilized her body that almost fell back into his arms and turned to look at him. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes. Because of this half-hug, he looked at her closely. It's already dinner time. Why don't you stay for dinner before leaving? Seeing that Feng Ling's hair is working so hard, let's leave a monthly ticket before leaving, okay? W. 4M. Chapter 1336. I won't eat. Shook will eat with me when she comes back from the gym. I can't leave her alone. I believe that as long as she knows that you're having dinner with me, she'll be happy to be left alone. The man didn't let go of her. Instead, he stretched out his other arm and hugged her from behind. However, he didn't hug her tightly. He just held her loosely like this. His voice was pressed against the back of her ear. It was warm and light, but it also had a faint hoarseness that belonged to him. Feng Ling actually wanted to ask when he had bribed Qin Shuk. However, after thinking about it, a girl with a temper like Qin Shuk's couldn't be easily bribed. She was probably really willing. This was even more difficult to deal with. For some reason, there was a little fangirl who wanted to help Gu Nanheng. Stay, just for dinner, N. The man's voice was still pressed against her ear. You came to help me bandage my wound. I should treat you to a meal to thank you. This is Mr. Mike's place. What kind of treat are you? You mean, after we leave the resort, if I say I want to treat you to a meal, will you come out to see me alone? Feng Ling's expression was cold. Forget it. What do you want to eat? The man curved his lips behind her and raised his hand to touch her head, just like in the past. However, in the past, her short hair was soft and fluffy. Now, it was still soft, but it was long hair, which made his heart itch uncontrollably. The kitchen in the resort has sent a menu to every room. It's probably with Yu Zheng. Go tell Yu Zheng and order a few dishes. Let's eat, Li Nanheng said as he buttoned his shirt cuffs. As Li Nanheng spoke, he buttoned up his shirt cuffs. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and said casually, "Give me 2 more bottles of older red wine. You know I can't hold my liquor well." Why do you want red wine? Feng Ling turned back to look at him. The man was still buttoning up his shirt. He looked so focused that she couldn't see anything. He didn't even raise his head. You've been in the business circle for so long, but you haven't even trained your alcohol tolerance. How are you going to survive? Since I can train you from a little girl with low stamina to a sniper with high stamina and endurance in swimming, I can also train your alcohol tolerance. Even if you drink too much at my place, nothing will happen. At most, I will take advantage of you. Besides, it's not like you haven't slept with me before. If something really happens, you won't lose anything. It's much better than getting drunk at other places. Feng Ling listened to the man's shameless words and did not move. She only watched him coldly. Sensing that she didn't order, Li Nanheng glanced at her again and smiled faintly. I'm just joking. I won't do anything to you even if I drink too much. Drink some red wine to liven things up. I'll get Qin Shuk to pick you up later. Do you think I can trust you? Feng Ling was expressionless. So, am I really a beast in your eyes? Li Nanheng asked. Feng Ling paused. Animal? She could be considered one, but she couldn't be considered one. What he did to her when he drove up the mountain was indeed beastly, but from the way he made it up to her, she could tell that he was really angry and agitated. They had known each other for so many years, and that was the only time he had been agitated. Considering all the things that had happened in the past, she didn't take it to heart. By now, that little bit of anger had long faded away. Although Feng Ling did not speak, she turned to look for Yu Zheng. After taking the menu, she ordered a few dishes that she and Li Nanheng were used to eating. After thinking for a few seconds, she said, "Ask them to send 2 bottles of red wine over. I want them to be older. If the price is too expensive, I'll pay for it." There's no need for Mr. Mike to spend so much money. All right. Yuzheng nodded and did not ask anything else. He followed Feng Ling's request and went out to call for help. When she returned to her room, she suddenly heard Li Nanheng's phone ring. She turned to look at him. The man picked up his phone, looked at the caller ID, and picked up the call. From his tone, it should be about work, so Feng Ling did not disturb him. She went back to the bathroom and took out the shirt she had washed earlier. She looked around and finally found an ironing machine and a folding table for ironing clothes in the cabinet by the bathroom. She opened the folding table, plugged in the ironing machine, and took out the shirt she had just washed to try to iron it. After Li Nanheng put down the phone, he turned back to see Feng Ling standing there to iron his clothes. The young and inexperienced boy in the past had now become a pure little woman. Because she was bent over, her long hair spread out on her shoulders and behind her back, getting in the way from time to time. She had to raise one hand to push back the long hair on one side, or use her fingers to tuck the long hair on her cheeks behind her ears. Her movements were natural and skillful. She was wearing a set of very soft white clothes. Although it was not a skirt, it had a bit of gauze texture, which inexplicably made her look like a fairy. Her face without any makeup was excessively fair and tender. A pair of clear and bright eyes were seriously looking at the shirt on the flat table as she slowly moved the ironing machine. This scene was like a husband who had just returned home from work and saw his wife washing and ironing his clothes. After tossing and turning for so many years, at this moment, Li Nanheng suddenly understood what he wanted. Whether it was in the base, the cabin he built in the jungle, or now. What he wanted was to give Feng Ling a stable home. Chapter 1337. However, as soon as Feng Ling's voice fell, the man suddenly held her waist. The moment she paused, he pressed her into his arms. Feng Ling asked in a low voice, "What are you doing?" Before she could finish her words, the man's burning kiss pressed down. Li Nanheng held her waist with one hand and clasped her chin with the other, forcing her to raise her head and accept his surging kiss. Feng Ling's lips were slightly open because she hadn't finished speaking. As a result, he easily pried open her teeth, entangled her tongue, pressed against the root of her tongue, and sucked hard as though he wanted to swallow her whole. Feng Ling anxiously grunted. Her instinctive reaction was to quickly turn off the power of the ironing machine. Otherwise, the shirt would definitely be ruined. Under her resistance, the man seemed to instantly understand her main intention. He still held her tightly with one hand and reached out with the other to press the switch under the ironing machine. As he cut off the power, he held her tightly. Li Nanheng's domineering kiss almost swept away all her dazed emotions. His hot and strong breath filled her mouth, causing her entire body to tremble instinctively. All her strength seemed to be taken away by this man in an instant. Feng Ling's legs softened. As the man's kiss deepened, it inexplicably reminded her of the time when she lived in the jungle. Every time she wanted to sleep well at night, he would kiss her until her entire body went limp and she had no choice but to go to bed with him. It was precisely because of those memories that Feng Ling's entire body instinctively softened because of the familiar feeling of the past. Because he kissed her too fiercely, his heavy breathing brushed against her facial features, forcing her to unknowingly burst into tears. More importantly, the man carried her and turned to sit on the fabric sofa at the side. She was forcefully pressed onto his lap and held in his arms. There was almost no space between the two of them, and they were tightly pressed against each other. The place under her body that was pressed against her was an existence that couldn't be ignored. As the man kissed her deeply, it became more and more aggressive. It was as though he was ready to give her a fatal blow at any time. Feng Ling pressed her hands against the man's hard chest. She could only hear his deep breathing and the ambiguous sound of their lips and tongues touching. Even her resisting whimpers were completely blocked by his mouth. Li Nanheng's scorching palm was branded on her waist. As though he was still not satisfied, his hand moved heavily on her body. Feng Ling was forced to lean against him to welcome another wave of hot kisses. After a long time, Li Nanheng finally let go of her red and swollen lips. He panted, his deep and dark gaze still on her face. At this time, Feng Ling was finally able to take a good breath. She had to admit that her entire body was soft, and her cheeks were red. Her black and white eyes seemed to have been washed several times, hazy and glistening with tears. More importantly, her eyes were a little dazed. It was as though she had only been ironing clothes. Why was she suddenly carried over and kissed for so long? She felt as though her soul had left her body. She felt as though she had returned to the jungle. She was busy with the small matters in the cabin all day, busy with eating and dressing, and at the same time, being carried and kissed by this man at any time. Seeing that she had not returned to her senses for a long time, Li Nanheng held her face, his Adam's apple moved, and he kissed Feng Ling's lips again. You. Feng Ling suddenly returned to herself and quickly pressed her hands against his chest to prevent him from approaching. Her voice was a little broken from the kiss. Li Nanheng, you, if he continued kissing her, she really couldn't take it. Li Nanheng had always been very aggressive, but he had always restrained all his aggression in front of her and weakened his strong and domineering instincts. But now, this man who no longer suppressed everything made her almost unable to resist. 10 months ago, she didn't expect that he would be in the car. Now she knew that this man could really do anything when he didn't restrain himself. A red light lit up in her heart, warning her that this man would push her down on the bed at any time. Even if his arm was injured, he could still press her here and do whatever he wanted. In the past, he was always too polite to her, and now, Li Nanheng was often too rude to her. Because of her struggle, Li Nanheng only paused for a moment before pressing her hands down. He did not allow her to refuse and continued kissing her. He bit her lips and kissed her until her head was dizzy. The wall of sobriety seemed to have been shattered. No. She only came to see the situation because of his arm injury. It was not like what Qin Shuk had said. Instead of smiling at those difficult partners all day, it was better to treat Li Nanheng better. She only came to see his injury. She did not want to offer herself up, nor did she want to make a deal with him. But what was this? Why was she suddenly kissed again? She was just ironing clothes. Feng Ling's mind was in a mess. When he finally let go of her, the woman in his arms was stunned and didn't come back to herself for a long time. She didn't drink at all, but she looked drunk and her cheeks were red. Feng Ling didn't know what to say. She didn't drink at all, but she looked drunk and blushed. You don't like it? He bit her earlobe, his voice low and husky. It was extremely sexy. Feng Ling was about to speak when the man chuckled softly. His smile was clear and hoarse. Why aren't you speaking? Why did you have to iron my clothes like a little wife? I couldn't help it. I forced myself not to pull you onto the bed. I just sat on the sofa and kissed you for a while. What's with your gaze? It's as if I've bullied you. I'm coaxing you like this. How do I look like I'm bullying you? As he spoke, he pressed her even more tightly in his arms, letting her feel the urgency somewhere in his body. Feng Ling's body immediately stiffened and she quickly stood up. The man looked at her familiar appearance and didn't want to feel all the changes in his body. He then looked at her red and swollen lips and messy hair and couldn't help chuckling softly. He stroked her cheek and his hot breath brushed against her face. If you have the patience to iron my clothes, why can't you have some patience to feel my heart for you? How long do you want to keep me cold? Feng Ling quickly stood up. Halfway up, she was pulled back into his arms by the man. This time, she did not sit on him but lay down in his arms. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.